By the rivers of Babylon, we sit and weep. By the rivers of Babylon, by the rivers of Babylon, we sit and weep. Tears in eyes when we remember home. There we hang our lives and we play no more shofar. No more need we instruments of joy. Sing to us, our captives shout a song from your land. But Zion's song cannot be rendered here. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we rest, when we remember Zion. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we rest, when we remember Zion. Carry us away, captivity, require from us a song. How can we sing Jehovah's song in a strange land? Carry us away, captivity, require from us a song. How can we sing Jehovah's song in a strange Carry us away, captivity, require from us a song. How can we sing Jehovah's song in a strange land? For the wicked, carry us away, captivity, require from us a song. How can we sing Jehovah's song in a strange
Welcome to the 10th Annual Shirley Chisholm Conference and Award Ceremony. My name is Dr. Ken Irish Bramble, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Research Center here at Medgar Evers College of the City University of New York. The Shirley Chisholm Conference was developed to celebrate the significant contributions of Caribbean Americans to the development of the United States, the trailblazing, pioneering, and progressive spirit of Caribbean Americans, and to perpetuate the tenacious, unbought and unbossed dedication to service, leadership, and sustainable development that characterized the spirit of Fighting Shirley Chisholm. Tonight, I join you from the empty Edison O. Jackson Auditorium on the Medgar Evers College campus as we explore new ways to deliver content to a wider audience. For the first time, the conference is being virtually pre-produced. All segments of this production were independently recorded and edited together for your viewing. Also, for the first time, we have timed the conference to coincide with the beginning of Caribbean American Heritage Month here in the United States. This year's conference and award ceremony recognizes 3 Caribbean Americans who have exemplified elements of the Shirley Chisholm legacy. They are trailblazers, advocates, leaders, role models who have earned their place in history by being firsts. The first Caribbean Americans, the first people of color, the first women. Caribbean Americans who have demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to service and to the uplift of disadvantaged and marginalized communities. In lieu of a keynote address this year, we offer viewers a rare opportunity to hear directly from the namesake of this annual event. This speech was one of her last speeches as a member of Congress and one which was directed specifically at this community. It was retrieved from the archives with the cooperation of our colleagues at the Charles Evans Innes Library across the street here at Medgar Evers College. Now to the program. We begin with the reading of the biography of Shirley Chisholm. The biography is being presented to you in a montage format. The readers include Caribbean American youth, women of color, and representatives of the Medgar Evers College community. Immediately following that, we will have a rendition of the national anthem of the United States of America, which will be played for you by Mr. Rodney Seow. Mr. Rodney Seow is a public school math teacher, an accomplished jazz musician, and the leader of the Rodney Seow Quartet.
Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm was a Caribbean-American woman born in Brooklyn, New York on November 30th, 1924. Her father was a factory worker from Guyana, and her mother was a seamstress from Barbados. She spent her early childhoods from the age of 3 to 10 in Barbados with her grandparents.
Shirley Chisholm returned to New York in 1934. She graduated from Brooklyn Girls High School in Bedford-Stuyvesant in 1942. Chisholm won tuition scholarships to several distinguished colleges, but decided to instead remain at home and attend Brooklyn College. She graduated with honors from Brooklyn College in 1946, where she won prizes on the debate team. She earned her master's degree from Columbia University in early childhood education in 1951.
Shirley Chisholm was an expert in early childhood education and child welfare issues. From 1953 to 1954, she was a director of the Friend in Need Nursery in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and from 1954 to 1959, she served as director of the Hamilton Madison Child Care Center in Lower Manhattan. Between 1959 and 1964, Ms. Shirley Chisholm worked as an educational consultant for the Division of Daycare in New York City's Bureau of Child Welfare.
Shirley Chisholm was involved in the struggle for social justice. In 1953, she joined efforts to elect Wesley Holder as the first Black judge in Brooklyn. She was a member of local chapters of the League of Women Voters, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as NAACP, the Urban League, the League of Women Voters, as well as the Democratic Party Club in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. She fought against racial discrimination in housing and sought to improve economic opportunities and services in Brooklyn.
In 1964, Chisholm ran for and became the second African American in the New York State Legislature. In the state legislature, she successfully fought for increased access to higher education for poor students and better work conditions for all New Yorkers, especially women.
In 1968, Chisholm ran for a seat in Congress. Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm was the first African American woman in Congress. She served for 14 years. She was a co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971, and in 1977 became the first Black woman and second woman ever to serve on the powerful House Rules Committee.
In 1972, she became the first woman and African American to seek the nomination for President of the United States from one of the two major political parties. She faced discrimination as a woman and as a person of color. She couldn't participate in televised primary debates and was permitted to make just one speech. She entered 12 primaries and 10% of the delegates' votes.
In 1983, Chisholm retired from Congress. She taught at Mount Holyoke College and co-founded the National Political Congress of Black Women. In 1991, she moved to Florida and later declined the nomination to become U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica due to ill health.
Shirley Chisholm is the ultimate role model for women in general and Black and brown women particularly who seek to hold political office. She ignited the conversation that proved a qualified woman and person of color should and could be taken seriously for the high office. In her 1968 victory election to the House of Representatives, she stated, "To Black and white Americans, although I'm making history this evening, I love to believe that my victory tonight is a symbol of hope for many of us who never dreamt or never believed that we would have had the opportunity to move into politics."
Her seminal speeches continue to inspire and motivate their listeners and readers. When 2018 was hailed the Year of the Women, women from around the nation, motivated by Shirley Chisholm, ran for elected offices in their efforts to change the current political climate. The gender battle continues with an impressive amount of women running and winning their elections to Congress and other political offices. Their victories reflect a culmination of courage and grit. In 2015, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded Shirley Chisholm the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Thanks to the late William R. Howard, first Vice President of the Shirley Chisholm Cultural Institution for Children and Finance, chair for her congressional and groundbreaking presidential campaigns.
Shirley Chisholm will always be remembered as a woman that pushed the boundaries of what someone can do when they are held down by society, and she brought the Black community closer as being viewed equal to our white counterparts.
Coming up next is a biography of James Weldon Johnson. As many of you may know, James Weldon Johnson is a Caribbean American poet who is most famous for composing the Black National Anthem. Immediately following the biography will be a presentation of the Black National Anthem by two Caribbean American artists, Miss Gail Blanche Gill of New Jersey and Miss Mariel Hawes of Noblesville, Indiana.
James Weldon Johnson was an early civil rights activist, a leader of the NAACP, and a leading figure in the creation and development of the Harlem Renaissance.
James Weldon Johnson was born in Jacksonville, Florida on June 17, 1871. His mother was Bahamian and his father was freedom-born from Virginia. He was brought up in a liberal environment, and his parents encouraged their children to acquire an education and pursue their dreams. His mother taught him and his brother the works of classical literature as well as music.
He was a civil rights activist, writer, composer, politician, educator, and lawyer, and was one of the leading figures in developing the movement known as the Harlem Renaissance. After graduating from the Atlanta University, Johnson became the principal of a grammar school, founded a newspaper, the Daily American, and indeed became the first African American to pass the Florida bar.
Johnson's brother had studied music at the New England Conservatory of Music and was living in New York. He eventually joined his brother there, where they both began writing songs for Broadway musicals. Together they wrote over 200 songs, but the most famous one was Lift Every Voice and Sing. This was originally written as a celebration for Abraham Lincoln's birthday, but was later hailed as the Black Anthem by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt appointed James Weldon Johnson, who was fluent in Spanish and French, to diplomatic positions in Venezuela and Nicaragua. When he returned in 1914, Johnson became involved with the NAACP and served as a chief executive of the organization. During this time, he was a leading figure in African American artistic community known as the Harlem Renaissance. James Weldon Johnson was also a prolific author and wrote several books and poems, including God's Trombones in 1927 and 50 Years and Other Poems in 1917. After retiring from the NAACP in 1930, Johnson devoted the rest of his life to writing. In 1934, he became the first African American professor at New York University. Johnson died in a car accident in Wiscasset, Maine, on June 26, 1938, at the age of 67. More than 2,000 people
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling
Tune in to Caribbean Focus with your host, Hermina Marcelin, every Sunday from 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. on WNYE 91.5 FM and stream live on Facebook at Caribbean Focus CF and YouTube at Caribbean Research Center at MEC. Join us for engaging interviews with national and local Caribbean American figures from all walks of life, from the arts to healthcare and more. When the community speaks, we listen.
When we think of the legacy of Shirley Chisholm, it is one of women overcoming great adversity and shattering glass ceilings. But she was not just the first for Caribbean American women. She was the first for women of color throughout this country. Tonight, we are honored to have with us the president of Medgar Evers College, Dr. Patricia Ramsey. Dr. Patricia Ramsey is the sixth president of Medgar Evers College, but also the first female president of Medgar Evers College. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you Dr. Patricia Ramsey.
I am pleased to bring greetings on behalf of Medgar Evers College for the Caribbean Research Center's 10th annual Shirley Chisholm Conference. This conference is near and dear to my heart because Ms. Chisholm was one of the leaders in the Central Brooklyn Coordinating Council that was responsible for bringing Medgar Evers College into fruition. Ms. Chisholm was the vice president of that group and went on to become the first Black woman to be elected to the United States Congress. As the first woman president of Medgar Evers College, I'm elated that Medgar Evers has a conference named for this great woman, a true trailblazer. Congratulations to all of the award recipients, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of this conference.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. Next, we have the presentation of our first award. Our first award is being presented to Dr. Waldauber Stewart, former New York State Senator and a senior fellow here at the Caribbean Research Center. The award is being presented by Ms. Sylvetta Gonzalez, a member of the CRC Advisory Board. Sadly, Dr. Stewart passed last year, and accepting the award on his behalf is Mr. Ray Allen. Bishop Gonzalez.
This is an emotional moment for me and the privilege to do this presentation on behalf of a great mind. Dr. Waldauber Stewart has served for 25 years as a capacity building specialist and political action organizer for disadvantaged groups and communities in New York, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the diaspora. In 1968, he was elected to the New York State Senate, where he served for 4 years. He was an educator who taught for several years at the elementary school, junior high school, and as an adjunct professor at Medgar Evers College of the City University of New York in the Department of Social and Behavioral Science. In 1994, Dr. Stewart founded the Southern Diaspora Research and Development Center and served as executive director and principal investigator of the center from its inception until its passing this year, 2022. Through the center, he specialized in the development of mechanisms for the participation of NGOs in sustainable development. He was also responsible for the institutional capacity building program of the Southern Caucus of NGOs for Sustainable Development. Dr. Waldemar H. Stewart was the holder of a Bachelor of Arts degree from Pace University, a Master of Arts degree from Hunter College, CUNY, New York, USA, and a PhD from Union Institute and University, Ohio, USA, 1982. Dr. Stewart was a transformational agitator whose resiliency stood up to systems of oppression that denied full access to people of African ancestry. Always vocal and never afraid of a fight, Dr. Stewart, through his work at the Caribbean Research Center and the Southern Diaspora Research and Development Corporation, never relinquished in his quest to empower people of color throughout the diaspora to work towards increasing self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and self-determination. A true Garveyite, he believed that only we could lift ourselves up and declare ourselves to be the mighty people we were meant to be. In his last years as a senior fellow at the Caribbean Research Center, he spearheaded projects aimed at changing the dialogue from one of the disadvantaged group to that of unrealized and unrecognized greatness. For him, the CRC was a den with brilliant geniuses from Medgar Evers College doing phenomenal research. Through his partnership with Dr. J.A. George Irish, he worked relentlessly and made the CRC a hallowed sanctuary whose purpose was for academic advancement, community development, and economic sustainability. These two magnificent masterminds, profound thinkers, and awesome leaders fought diligently for freedom, education, democracy, equity, hope for the future, justice, peace, human rights, and unity. Their transformative work in Central America through the establishment of UNIPOP demonstrated a paradigm shift in the approach to the fight for equity and liberty for many Central American farmers. They liberated the political and economic minds of Central American farmers and taught them how collectivism could radicalize their quest for economic freedom. Therefore, we thought it most fitting on this auspicious occasion, the celebration of the Caribbean American Heritage Month, and the celebration of the legacy of the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Stewart by granting him the Caribbean Research Center Lifetime Award. The award reads, in appreciation of his outstanding commitment to promoting sustainable development and self-determination for marginalized community throughout Latin America, the Caribbean, and their diasporas. And in recognition of his service to the Caribbean American population, the people of the great state of New York, and Medgar Evers College, CUNY. Caribbean Research Center, June 7th, 2022. Accepting the award on the behalf of Dr. Waldeba H. Stewart is Mr. Ray Allen.
Thank you, Bishop Gonzalez, for this prestigious award. I also like to thank the Advisory Committee of Caribbean Research Center and the Director, Dr. Ken Irish Gramble, for this prestigious award on behalf of Zolaine and the Stewart family, as well as the Southern Diaspora Research and Development Center. It is my honor in receiving this prestigious award for a magnificent man, Senator Dr. Waldeba Stewart, who filibustered single-handedly Albany for Medgar Evers College to be built in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York. It is fitting to say that Dr. Waldeba Stewart and his comrade, Dr. George Irish, together fought diligently for the Caribbean Research Center to make it a milestone, a important facility at the Medgar Evers College for our students and faculty, and students from all over the globe. So at this time, I'd just like to say once again, thank you.
The Caribbean Research Center is home to one of the oldest research libraries dedicated to the study of the Caribbean and its diasporas. The CRC Reading Room remains the only publicly accessible special collection dedicated to the study of the Caribbean and its diasporas in New York City. While other special collections and digital archives have emerged in recent years around the nation, most have concentrated predominantly on the study of Latin America. The Caribbean Research Center remains the only library dedicated to the study of Caribbean American, Caribbean immigrant, and Caribbean diasporic studies. Our special collection includes hundreds of hard copy texts, audio-visual files, conference papers, and special reports on Caribbean literature, history, culture, and political thought. It includes classical works by Sir Arthur Lewis, Walter Rodney, Sir Dennis Walcott, Edwidge Danticat, J.A. George Irish, and other notable Caribbean authors. And in addition, we also hold publications by less-known, up-and-coming writers in all genres. In recent years, CRC has limited access to its special collection and its reading room. However, we intend to reopen and expand our services beginning in the 2022-2023 academic year. Our current reading room is under construction as we restructure it for reopening and expansion in the fall. We are asking for your support in our efforts to retain and expand our library's collection and for digitizing elements of our collection, making them more accessible to both researchers, scholars, and the public at large. Donations of all sizes can be made by utilizing the link provided below. All donations are tax deductible, and we look forward to your support.
Our next award is the Caribbean American Women's Heritage Award.
This award is being presented to another pioneering Caribbean American woman. This year's recipient is the Honorable Sylvia Hines Radix. Presenting the award to her is the Chair of the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences and former Executive Director of the Caribbean Research Center, Dr. Maria de Longoria. Dr. de Longoria.
Good evening. I would like to welcome you again to the conference. I am Dr. Maria de Longoria. I am an advisory board member of the Caribbean Research Center, and I have the honor of presenting the 2022 Caribbean Research Center Caribbean American Women's Heritage Award. This year's conference theme is Agitate, Advocate, Activate, the legacy of Caribbean Americans in the fight for social justice and inclusion. I mention that because this year's recipient has such a distinguished legacy that she fits so perfectly into the theme itself. This year's recipient is the Honorable Sylvia Hines Radix. Judge Hines Radix has a demonstrated record of working tirelessly for the broader New York City community and Brooklyn in particular. In case you missed the news in January, this Bayesian powerhouse was appointed by New York City Mayor Eric Adams as the city's Corporation Counsel, aka Chief Legal Officer for the City of New York. She is the first Caribbean-born woman to hold this position. Her primary responsibilities include oversight for all civil litigation on behalf of the city and providing legal counsel for city officials. Prior to this appointment, she served as administrative judge for civil matters in the 2nd Judicial District, where she oversaw both the New York State Supreme Court civil term and the New York City Civil Court, which includes Housing Court. Previously, Hines Radix was elected to the Supreme Court of Kings County. She served as a civil court judge and has worked in the criminal courts of Kings County. She began her legal career at District Council 37, also known as DC 37, Municipal Employees Legal Services. So from what I have just presented, I hope you all can see why Judge Hines Radix is the perfect recipient for the Caribbean Research Center's Caribbean American Women's Heritage Award. Congratulations, Judge Hines Radix.
Good evening. To Executive Director, Dr. Ken Irish Bamble, Chair. To the Right Reverend Sylvester Hamilton Gonzalez, the officers and board members of the Medgar Evers College Caribbean Research Center, and to Dr. Maria Longoria, Chair of the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Thank you for bestowing me with the Caribbean American Women's Heritage Award. First, let me offer congratulations to my fellow honorees, New York State Majority Leader, the Honorable Andrea Stewart Cousins, and former and now deceased New York State Senator Waldobor Stewart. May his soul rest in peace. I am deeply humbled and honored to have been chosen to receive this prestigious Caribbean American Women's Award on this auspicious occasion, the 10th Annual Shirley Chisholm Conference. The namesake of this conference, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, has always been an individual that I have respected and admired. Her famous words, unbought and unbossed, have always resonated with me. She was the definition of a trailblazer. Ms. Chisholm was the first African American woman elected to the United States Congress and the first African American woman to seek the nomination for President of the United States. Her entire life and career have been an example of how to succeed even when people are against you. I can imagine how proud she would have been to see the first African American Indo-Caribbean woman elected as Vice President
of our great nation. Although Miss Chisholm was born and raised in Brooklyn, she was the child of Caribbean immigrant parents who hailed from Guyana and my home island, Barbados. Being raised by Caribbean parents is an experience that is second to none. We are taught from a young age about work ethic and responsibility. We are taught that our dreams matter and that in order to achieve our dreams, we must put in the necessary work. Also, we are taught that the importance of receiving a good education is tantamount to achieving success. Those are some of the lessons my siblings and I learned from our parents. And it is because of this foundation instilled in me that I am able to come before you today as the 81st Corporation Council of the City of New York, the first Caribbean and Black woman to hold this position. My career journey began when I was 8 years old, literally on my mother's knee. My mother loved a radio program named Portia Faces Life, which was about a female attorney who won all of her cases. I would sit at my mother's knee and listen to every program. My love of the law began and continued to grow throughout my formative years. Once I migrated to the United States, I continued to follow my dream of becoming an attorney, culminating in receiving my Juris Doctorate degree from Howard University School of Law. After graduation, I knew that I wanted to work in public service. Helping people was always and has always been a part of my character and a part of my calling. So, District Council 37, the largest union representing municipal employees in the state of New York, became my home for 16 years. I joined the Municipal Employees Legal Services Unit, where I was able to assist members with a myriad of issues, including but not limited to affirmative litigation, landlord tenant, and bankruptcy issues. While working with the members, I discovered an area that needed to be addressed: immigration. Many of our members had green cards but couldn't vote. Some needed assistance completing the complicated paperwork as they needed to apply for citizenship or for their relatives to become permanent residents. After speaking with union leadership, I was instrumental in beginning the first immigration unit. It blossomed into a model that other unions wanted to duplicate and are still in existence today. During my time at DC 37, I remember walking into several courtrooms, and I recall not seeing anyone who looked like me, not the judges, not the clerks, or the court staff. I decided to expand my dream to become a judge so that when people of color entered the courtroom, they would see judges and court personnel who represent the beautiful melting pot of New York City. I began my judicial career in 2002 in the New York City Civil Court and spent a year as a judge in the New York City Criminal Court. In 2004, I was elected to the New York Supreme Court bench, where I presided over cases in civil litigation, commercials, guardianship, and matrimonial. And I presided over a city park for 2 years. But in 2009, I became the administrative judge for civil matters in Brooklyn. And in that capacity, I oversaw both the Supreme Court and the New York Civil Court. It was ironic that I later, in 2012, received a call from Governor Cuomo's office informing me that I was being appointed as an Associate Justice of the New York Appellate Division, Second Department. I remember my excitement, but to be honest, I was a little nervous to be starting something new. I remember saying to the Governor's Council, "Could I get back to you?" Of course, I accepted the position, and went on to work with some of the brightest and hardest working jurists and clerks and support professionals that I have ever met. The second department is the largest and the busiest appellate court in the state, and the people who are there, including the judges, the clerks, the court officers, and all of the staff, are dedicated to ensuring that the people of this great state are able to have their voices heard. That sentiment is true for all court employees in every court I've been proud of to work in. And my colleagues and I have done, I believe, a yeoman's job throughout our careers on the bench. So when Mayor Adams called and asked me to serve as the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York, I knew that God had something special in mind for me. I've been truly blessed throughout my life and in my career, and this opportunity has allowed me to serve the people of the City of New York in a capacity that I haven't been able to before. As Corporation Counsel, the Law Department and I represent the mayor, the City Council, citywide elected officials, and all mayoral and non-mayoral agencies in affirmative and defensive civil litigation. I am grateful for the opportunity to work closely with the mayor and the City Council, helping to shape and defend the laws that govern our city. As I have always said, I've been blessed with wonderful parents and siblings. I have an amazing career where I've been able to see all of my dreams to fruition. However, the best job I have ever had and continue to hold is wife and mother to my husband and my 3 beautiful daughters. I thank you for always loving me and supporting me. You're truly the wind beneath my wings. I am nothing without you. My oldest daughter would say to me that her friends thought she lived a life like the TV show, The Huxtables. My husband is a dentist and I'm an attorney. And together we have raised these 3 strong, independent, intelligent, and dependable young women who are already taking this world by storm. And I'm so proud of all that they have accomplished and will continue to achieve. This Caribbean American Women's Heritage Award means a lot to me because I am humbled that you chose me to receive such a distinguished award. And I thank you for acknowledging my life and my career. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I will cherish this tribute always. I leave you with this quote from Vice President Kamala Harris that resonates with me because my mother would say it to me as well. You may be the first to do many things, but make sure you are not the last. I will always remember that I stand on the shoulders of those who have come before me, and I will always reach back and help the next generation achieve their goals. I thank you, and I wish you a pleasant evening.
Tune in to Caribbean Focus with your host, Hermina Marcelin, every Sunday from 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. on WNYE 91.5 FM and stream live on Facebook at Caribbean Focus CF and YouTube at Caribbean Research Center at MEC. Join us for engaging interviews with national and local Caribbean American figures from all walks of life, from the arts to healthcare and more. When the community speaks, we listen.
It is my honor to introduce to you next a woman who is following closely in the legacy of Shirley Chisholm. She is a fighter. She has worked hard and dedicated herself to representing the people of Brooklyn, Caribbean Americans, and women of color in general. For the past 9 years, she has represented us in the 9th Congressional District, New York's 9th Congressional District. Prior to that, she represented us and fought for us in the New York City Council from 2002 to 2006. Please welcome a true friend of the Caribbean Research Center, Medgar Evers College, and a champion for all, Miss Yvette Clarke.
Greetings, everyone, and happy Caribbean Heritage Month. Although we're not able to join together in person, it is a sincere pleasure to be with you virtually this evening. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent New York's 9th Congressional District in Central and South Brooklyn. Please allow me to thank Mr. Michael Flanagan and his team at the Caribbean Research Center, all organizers, panelists, and participants that made this evening's 10th annual Shirley Chisholm Conference possible. Let me also salute the very distinguished cohort of honorees and the dedicated community leadership who are amongst us today. The Caribbean Research Center is home to prolific thought leaders and academics who have dedicated their lives to diligently pressing forward in the quest to preserve, identify, and advance our beautiful and vibrant Caribbean culture. My Shiro and dearly beloved Caribbean sister, the Honorable Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm, as we all know, was the daughter of Caribbean immigrants, the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, and the first woman, Black or white, to run for president on a major political party line. Congresswoman Chisholm lived her American dream out loud. She agitated the political system designed to oppress, suppress, and deny Black Americans and other marginalized groups the same rights and constitutional protections enjoyed by white Americans. Our Caribbean warrior, Shirley Chisholm, taught us to be bold and fierce in demanding our human rights and freedoms. She is famously quoted as saying, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." Fighting Shirley Chisholm was audacious, and as she fiercely and unapologetically advocated for her people in the beloved community against the American political machine determined to take more than its fair share and to subordinate the humanity of communities of color in spite of the damage inflicted upon a healthy democracy. Shirley Chisholm and other notable Caribbean Americans like Harry Belafonte, world-renowned actor, calypso artist, and civil rights activist. Sidney Poitier, the first African-American actor to receive the Academy Award for Best Actor. James Weldon Johnson, Harlem Renaissance poet and author of the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman and Black woman Vice President of the United States. Malcolm X, civil rights leader. Marcus Garvey, the father of Pan-Africanism. Colin Powell, the first Black U.S. Secretary of State. And a giant in law, Constance Baker Motley, the first Black woman appointed to the federal bench. They all agitated for change in America and made it possible for us to experience the liberties we have today. The list of highly accomplished Caribbean Americans is long and impressive. They activated our human spirit from the West Indies to the Americas and brought us into an awakening that improved our world. Make no mistake, we Caribbean people are a force to be reckoned with, and this is our moment to celebrate our beautiful heritage, vibrant culture, our triumphs and contributions to the world and to all humankind. Shirley Chisholm is one example of the long storied history of Caribbean people defying the odds and expectations and forging a path of unparalleled excellence. Indeed, we boast a proud history of agitating, activating, and advocating for freedom, equality, and justice. and none did it more boldly than our fighting Shirley Chisholm. That is why it is incumbent on all of us to carry on the torch she lit to demand that the United States of America, the land that our ancestors turns into the land that our ancestors dreamt for us, a land where we are all able to share unobstructed in the harvest of our labor. As many of you may know, the seat I hold in Congress is in part the very one once represented by the Honorable Shirley Chisholm. The gravity of holding this historic seat fuels my passion for the people I represent and my lifelong Brooklyn home. As the only Black woman in New York's congressional delegation, I take great pride and care with this opportunity and privilege to champion those who are less fortunate and underrepresented. I'm not only duty bound, I am compelled to do so. Because Shirley Chisholm and so many other distinguished Caribbean Americans, like my mother, the Honorable Dr. Una Clark, built the blueprint that has shaped and guided me in my work as a public servant and representative of the people of the Ninth District of New York. Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm was a woman who dared to fight the power, thereby becoming a true catalyst for change. And I have pledged to do the same, which is precisely how I intend to keep carrying on her phenomenal legacy. We are all very fortunate that her life, which pioneered progress and restructured the status quo, has provided us the vision to see a better world for all of us. It starts with agitating the status quo. It continues with advocating for our Caribbean American community and diaspora and all people of African descent and those who continue to be marginalized in our civil society. And we must keep on activating humanity to push for our ongoing progress, maintain that progress, and gain ground for this generation and generations to come. We know all too well that progress has never happened by accident. It takes leaders and doers. Thankfully, today we have countless of them that are paving the way to a brighter, more equitable future. Our pursuit of equity, our desire for sovereignty is not just the Caribbean way, it's the Caribbean DNA. Together, I believe we have a moral mandate and obligation to not just examine racial inequities that still span every sector and every segment of our society today, but fight against the scourge of white supremacy that threatens our very lives. But we must continue to tell our stories, our lived experiences, and with a sense of duty, tell the truth about how we got here. I have no doubt we will continue to do the work necessary to advance our Caribbean diaspora community as directed by the Honorable Shirley Chisholm. We must remain vigilant as actions are taken to strip us of our freedom to live out our American dream. We must agitate, advocate, and activate to truly live a life worthy of the sacrifices of those who preceded us. So thank you all for everything you do to promote and preserve Caribbean heritage. You are the change maker the world needs and deserves. I'm so proud to be a member of this tribe. Have a wonderful Caribbean Heritage Month and celebration, and stay strong, stay healthy, stay blessed. One love.
Developing strong literacy skills is an essential component of any sustainable development program. Public libraries play a huge role for any nation who is trying to develop the literacy skills of their citizens. Yet, across the Caribbean, many libraries remain under-resourced and underfunded. Meanwhile, here in the United States, each year, hundreds of books are thrown out by our neighbors, parents, students, graduates. This year, for the first time, the Caribbean Research Center is launching a book drive to support the public libraries in the Caribbean. Each year, we will pick 3 libraries to be the beneficiaries of our book drive. During the month of June, drop boxes will be located on campus and in strategic locations throughout Brooklyn. Books of all genres are acceptable. To learn more information about how you can contribute to our book drive, please call us at 718-270-6218. Donors also wishing to donate new books may have them shipped to us at Caribbean Research Center Book Drive, 1150 Carroll Street, room C313, Brooklyn, New York, 11225. Please support us.
Shirley Chisholm was an advocate for education, but not just elementary education where her personal experience was, but education for all on all levels. And you don't know, she was also an advocate for the creation and development of this college, Medgar Evers College. 40 years ago, 1982, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm blessed us with her presence and gave a speech here. Today, we have retrieved that speech from the archives and we share it with you for your listening pleasure. We hope you enjoy this presentation of Shirley Chisholm talking about the importance of leadership for the Black community.
Thank you very, very much for that wonderful introduction. And I do want to say to you, I have prepared a few very provocative remarks that I'm going to leave with you as I take leave of this community. I am paying the price for leadership. There are just 2 incidents that I am going to share with you before I get into my speech to let you know what I mean by that phrase, I am paying the price for leadership. I have always believed very deeply that in terms of leadership, that it is very important, that it is very necessary from time to time to put together certain kinds of ingredients which might not always work. But because of the circumstances of the moment, in order to get to the bottom line, and in order to be an effective person, being able to deliver and not being constantly on an emotional trip, that there were times that one would be very gravely misunderstood. And I have been misunderstood in this my home base. When it was known that I was getting ready to leave the United States House of Representatives, it was amazing to me that I received over 700 letters within 48 hours and telegrams from people all over this country saying, "You're not our congressperson, but your voice has been so meaningful and so helpful. And even though we may not agree with you on every stance and every position that you take, we know what you have done in a concrete, substantive way." We have to understand that although we're all Black, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will agree with each other on every step that you take and everything that you do, but that we will be broad enough to really try to comprehend and communicate. What are the 2 examples I'm speaking about? When I ran for the presidency in 1971 and 1972, my brothers and sisters, and George Wallace was almost assassinated, if you recall that time. And all of the persons who were running for presidential candidates at that time, went to see George Wallace. Muskie, Humphrey, Kennedy, everybody who was running went to see George Wallace. I, Shirley Chisholm, I was running also for president, and I decided to go and see George Wallace because I felt that in spite of what had happened that I didn't want to see that happen to anybody, irrespective of their philosophy. And that was the first time I began to learn something about leadership and how you are evaluated by some of your own people. The letters that I receive from people all over this country, I will be releasing them in the future because I didn't know people could write that way. And why did I visit him? I visited him because I was a presidential candidate like the rest of the individuals. And not only that, he was still the governor of Alabama. And he still had his foot on the necks of black people in Alabama. You live in the North. And I was visionary enough to realize that at some time in the future I might need his assistance. And look at what happened. In order to get the minimum wage bill passed in this country, to redound to the benefit of domestics of whom 80% are black, I called on George Wallace to get the necessary votes because I couldn't get the 6 votes that were necessary. And today, black women are part of the minimum wage law. It does not mean, my friends, doesn't mean that I was in bed with George Wallace because of his conservative views and what have you. It means that I was a pragmatic political animal who's misunderstood. That's what it meant. Then a few weeks ago, with Koch's election, got those letters in another box. Everybody knows what happened then. But I know when that $2 billion starts coming into this city in March, where the new federalism concept says that all of the money now will be distributed by the mayors and the governors. The mayors and the governors of this nation have become the strongest political officials in this land because of the fact that the states' rights theory under the new federalism concept has really come back to the fore. I did not support a mayor who has many difficulties because I necessarily loved him. I am a pragmatic political animal. I supported the mayor because I recognized that in terms of what was going to happen and what we are now experiencing, particularly in light of what the president just said a few days ago, that it was very necessary to be able to have your foot inside the door so as to be able to make sure you get your just portion of the pie when the money is distributed. That is what being a pragmatic politician means. But if you want to get carried away on trips of emotionalism and people mau-mauing and what have you, that's your business. I am leaving. And now I want to just talk to you about black leadership must be earned. How well I know that. In the 1880s, over 100 years ago, the Reconstruction era freedoms and the gains for the blacks in America were being brutally reversed. From Jim Crow laws to lynchings, white America returned the divided, leaderless black community to disfranchisement and economic exploitation. In 1980, armed with opportunities won in the nonviolent Civil War of Selma and Birmingham, Alabama, we are nonetheless in danger once more of returning to an earlier condition of second or third class citizenship. Our inspired and inspiring leaders of the 60s succumbed to the deadly violence of hate. Unfortunately for the masses, those that have risen to replace them seem to lack the same inner fire. They seem to lack the selfless commitment. They seem to lack the same kind of principle, determination, and stubbornness. They seem to lack the independence that had led us from segregation to affirmative action. Today's black leaders, in my humble opinion, mostly beholden to and manipulated by the white media and the economic establishment, have lost the way to a certain extent to the promised land, while the leeches of poverty, unemployment, and hopelessness suck the strength from the body of Black America. And in many instances haven't turned the civil rights movement into a fundraising and media attention competition. They seek legitimacy on Wall Street instead of in the tenements and storefront churches of the ghetto. And the question must be answered: what made Dr. King, what made Malcolm X, what made Adam Clayton Powell great leaders? What were the personal strengths of Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey? Where are their successors? Why do we at present have the mouths and the really petty dealings and maneuverings, but not the minds and the genius and the brains of great leaders and of Black aspirations? How can each of us help to recreate a physical and a spiritual environment where true leaders can again flourish? A leader has been defined, my friends, as a dealer in hope. The wave that's pushed ahead by the ship. The product of collective needs, collective values, collective crises, or even collective despair. A leader, it has been said, must know that he knows, and must be able to make it abundantly clear to those about him that he knows. He articulates and justifies the resentment dammed up in the souls of the frustrated. He kindles the vision of a breathtaking future so as to justify the sacrifice of a transitory present. He has to be practical and a realist. And he must talk the language of the visionary and the idealist. And believing both in the movement and in himself as its chosen instrument, he administers to his followers' most pressing need. And that is the need to believe in the real possibility of escape from a distressing and an oppressive life predicament. Our finest leaders, embodying all of these qualities, have uplifted the millions of social and psychological victims of institutional failure. And overcoming the oppression of the society, they sparked and they fueled the passion of their followers by a clearly unbreakable inner strength. Born into slavery or freedom, raised in Atlanta, Georgia, or Boston, Massachusetts, minister, junior high school dropout, or an abolitionist editor, each was a highly disciplined idealist, filled with righteous anger and wedded uncompromisingly to the cause. Where are those kinds of leaders today? Of the people, always close to the people, they brought about a togetherness whose forces could not be ignored. And in terms of the leadership today in our Black communities, what has happened is that if the leaders do not always see the same path, or they do not always use the same approach to a situation, there is so often the end product that people really begin to chop these people who are in leadership positions down. They begin to retaliate. Whoever told you in this room that because you are all black, that blacks have to be monolithic in their thinking? Whoever told you within the confines of my voice this afternoon that there aren't black conservatives all the way to black radicals or black progressives? Whoever told you that because the amount of melanin in our skin is approximately the same, that we have to think the same way, talk the same way, address problems the same way, and march the same way? Whoever told you that in spite of who we are and what we are, that there isn't such a thing as coming together and affecting a compromise or some kind of solution that will be acceptable to all of us who are a part of this thing. You are the sum total of your life's experiences and the stimuli to which you have been exposed. I am the sum total of my life's experiences and the stimuli to which I have been exposed. So therefore, I don't expect you to think like me, act like me, or even believe in me. Then must you expect the same thing to me. But good heavens, Lord, come together and let's see if we can't work out a solution that is acceptable and that we can move along with. Even without the thousands of black elected officials that now hold office across America, great legislative achievements were gained. The black minority, activated by Malcolm X, unified by Dr. King and others of equal commitment, became the conscience of this nation and was able to wring from a reluctant white majority the basic rights of our citizenship. May they rest in peace. And just as the momentum of progress appeared unstoppable, assassinations and then undirected rage and riots slammed on the brakes. A counterforce of cynicism, apathy, white backlash, and a leadership vacuum began gaining strength at the end of the decades of the 60s and remains the principal challenge to blacks in America in 1982. Followers exist in greater numbers than ever, but followers with no leaders can do nothing. For many who attempt to lead and to set examples, they are crushed and lied about and distorted and misinterpreted. And what happens eventually, that your own self-survival then takes precedence over group survival. But the me generation is meaningless to Southern sharecroppers or urban unemployed youth who cannot drop out of the rat race into a hot tub in Malibu. The need for unity of purpose and action in the black community, guided by independent, creative, unselfish leaders, is no less in this winter of 1982 than it was in the spring of 1955. And to the detriment of millions of blacks struggling with poverty and unemployment, and to the benefit of a kind of lingering racism, the grins and the generalities of today's black leaders in many instances leave us with the status quo or worse. But I'm leaving the political arena, and I want to tell you that unferreted and being able to speak my mind out very fully and going to places where I will be understood and places where people recognize that deep down within me There's a real sense of commitment because of misunderstanding, because the prophet is never accepted in his own home. I am going off in other waters. Many black assemblies and black caucuses and black agendas, my dear friends, and far too many instances have become divisive collections of individuals carrying in each hip pocket a personal agenda for their own ascendancy to the detriment of the masses. And no new strategies are able to emerge from any collective group of blacks who really believe that they're coming together for the agenda. They're coming together to map and not to rap and or nap, but they're coming together to map. And nothing can emerge unless there is a feeling, a collective feeling, that you are going there not to push your own agenda and not to fight each other to get the microphone pushed in your face when the media comes around. Should step aside. I want to say to you in closing that I am very, very grateful for the opportunity that I have had to be of service in this community for the past 14 years in the United States Congress, 7 years in the New York State Legislature. Ever since I emerged in politics some 23 years ago, my life has not been an easy life. There is no politician in central Brooklyn, barring none, that had to go through what I, Shirley Chisholm, has had to go through. I'm not a perfect human being. I have weaknesses and I have strengths. But never have I seen a consistent and persistent attack launched upon a politician the way it has been launched in the New York Amsterdam News the past 3 months on Shirley Chisholm. Never have I seen it. And I'm here to say this afternoon, also with the tremendous distortions. And for those of you who read that paper and do not understand a lot of things, of course you have to come to your conclusions about me. Distorted and twisted information. The fact that I, Shirley Chisholm, do not even live in Brooklyn, that I live in Buffalo. And the fact that Shirley Chisholm lives and has lived and continues to live in the heart of Brooklyn, because I knew and I recognized just what would happen if my people knew that I lived otherwhere than Brooklyn. I know my people, and I did it. And then to put something like that in the paper and to have people meeting me on the street, giving me the lip because of the lies. The fact that one could say that Shirley Chisholm wasn't interested in food stamps or the welfare of black people because she didn't get on the agricultural committee when she went to Congress. For you, the masses, I love you dearly, and I love you madly. But I know that you don't have access to the newspapers. You don't have access to the media in order to be able to respond to some of the things that has been done to the only national black female politician on the Eastern Seaboard. And I know why they're doing it. They won't have me to kick around anymore. They'll have to find someone else. Thank you.
What if you could get access to the best that Caribbean businesses all over the world had to offer? That would be amazing, right? With just one click, you get all that and more when you download the Day Abroad app. Day Abroad offers exclusive discounts and incentives from Caribbean restaurants and professionals worldwide. Plus, you get access to all your favorite culture festivals and concerts all in one app. Sounds too good to be true. It isn't. Download Day Abroad on the Apple and Google Play Store now. While you're at it, follow us on social media at DEH Abroad to learn more and get more. Live, eat, and play abroad like a boss.
This year's Shirley Chisholm Award is being presented to Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins. First elected to the state Senate in 2006, Senator Stewart Cousins currently represents Greenberg, Scarsdale, and parts of White Plains, New Rochelle, and Yonkers. She previously served as the Westchester County Legislator, and during her tenure, she was elected the Majority Whip and Vice Chair. As a county legislator, she authored and passed landmark legislation, including the first human rights law in Westchester County. Before elected office, Andrea Stewart Cousins was the first African American to serve as Director of Community Affairs for the city of Yonkers. Andrea Stewart Cousins was born and raised in New York to parents who encouraged a life grounded in education and service. These values, along with her strong belief in advocating for the underserved and championing the needs of working families, have distinguished her as a public servant and a progressive leader. Andrea Stewart Cousins earned her Bachelor of Science degree from Pace University, and her teaching credentials in business education from Lehman College of the City University of New York, while raising her children as an adult. In 2008, she earned a Master's of Public Administration from Pace University. She's a proud member of Pi Alpha Alpha, a public administration honor society. Before entering public service, Andrea Stewart Cousins worked in a variety of professions, including customer service, sales, marketing, journalism, personnel, and as a teacher for the Yonkers public school system. In just her first year as Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart Cousins led the most progressive legislative session in the state's history. She has been widely recognized as a trailblazer in local and state government and champion for progressive action. In 2012, she became the first woman, the first African American woman, and the first Caribbean American woman to lead a New York State legislative conference. In 2019, she shattered the glass ceiling when her peers elected her as temporary president and majority leader of the state Senate. Majority Leader Stewart Cousins oversaw the passage of historic and transformative legislation on issues including voting reform, gun safety, women's rights and health care, immigration and dreamers, the LGBTQ community, the justice system, and sexual harassment in the workplace. Additionally, the Senate majority, under her leadership, passed the most comprehensive and aggressive climate change legislation in the nation, and the strongest tenant protections and affordable housing package in the state history. Senate Majority Leader Stewart Cousins resides in Yonkers. She was married to the late Thomas Cousins, has 3 children and 6 grandchildren. And once again, it is my honor to present this year's Shirley Chisholm Award to New York State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins.
Hello, I'm Andrea Stewart Cousins, the temporary president and majority leader of the New York State Senate. It is an honor to receive the Shirley Chisholm Award and join you all virtually for the 10th annual Shirley Chisholm Conference. I want to thank Reverend Sylvita Hamilton Gonzalez and the late former Senator Waldalva Stewart for this nomination. It is truly an honor to accept an award named for Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm's legacy has had a tremendous impact on me and Black women in politics. I, like every one of us in this Zoom, am standing on the shoulders of giants. It's been 50 years since Shirley Chisholm's historic run for president, and she continues to show us, especially Black women, about our power and the endless possibilities for us not only to run for office, but to lead. The gains that we're seeing today with regard to Black women, women of color in politics is directly related to Shirley Chisholm and her presidential run. This award marks an achievement in a long journey filled with highs and lows, victories and setbacks. My journey into politics was not traditional, nor an easy one, but it's always been a worthwhile endeavor. It's one that's taught me what I have needed to know and provided me with the stamina to get here. As you may know, I have the distinct honor of being the first woman to lead a legislative body in New York State history. Each time I'm asked about being the first woman and first African-American woman to be in this position, I think of Shirley Chisholm. I think of Mary McLeod Bethune. I think of my former colleagues like Senator Velmanette Montgomery and Ruth Hassel Thompson and countless other women who came before me. Women who stood up, paved the path for me to get here. I know that it's up to me to create a pathway for more Black women and women to follow me. And I understand that I'm carrying a baton that Shirley Chisholm passed to us all. Shirley created a pathway for women to follow, and she's remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change. And that is why, as leader of the New York State Senate, I make sure that we pass equitable legislation that will help level the playing field. I also ensure that the doors were held open for me and that they will remain open for Black women, women of color, and women who come after me. That's why I'm committed to reducing the hurdles, leveling the playing field, and watching more women rise. I am honored to be the recipient of this year's Shirley Chisholm Award and know that I cannot rest, and I know that our progress is not done. And so I thank you for this encouragement.
In the final segment of this year's conference, we bring to you our panel discussion. The panelists have been carefully selected to represent different aspects of Shirley Chisholm's life and legacy.
All right, good evening and welcome to the panel discussion segment of the Shirley Chisholm Conference. This evening, we are honored to bring with you a very distinguished panel representing various elements of the civic engagement community. This evening, we are joined by Mr. Jelani Deschong, Ms. Sophia Williams, Mr. Pablo Muriel, Dr. Pablo Muriel, excuse me, Mr. Dennis Morales, and we will be joined shortly by Ms. Chandler Waterman, Mrs. Chandler Waterman. Each of the panelists here represent different elements of the effort to engage our communities and to push for sustainable development and growth, equity and justice in our communities in the spirit of Shirley Chisholm. I'll start off by allowing them to introduce themselves briefly and give you a little insight into their various backgrounds. I'll start with you, Mr. Deschong.
Yeah, thanks so much. My name is Jelani Deschong, currently a candidate for office here in Central Brooklyn, running for New York State Assembly in the 43rd Assembly District. Grew up in this community, actually, grew up right a few blocks away from my grandmother's myself. Went to school at Prospect Heights, PS 138, PS 241. Just a local kid who's worked in government for the past 10 years, just looking to do something different for his community. Began my service working in the city council, working for then Councilman Jumaane Williams, who's now public advocate and running for governor. And then I took my talents working for the former governor, Andrew Cuomo, and then most recently working for the current governor, Kathy Hochul. And then after working with her office for the first 150 days of her administration, I decided to throw my hat in the ring and represent the community that has given me so much. So just looking to offer up my advice and my expertise and my short little experience that I've had in state and local government.
Thank you, Mr. Deshawn. Next, we'll hear from Sophia Williams.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Sophia Williams, and again, I thank you for having me on this program this evening. Really quickly, I graduated from Baruch College a few years back, and that's really where my work began with community engagement and social justice. I am a community organizer, social justice activist, change maker, and a lot of my focus centers around ending mass incarceration and connecting that, bridging that with different societal oppressions. For me, I was um, like in halfway through my time at Baruch, and I took a history course on the civil rights movement that really changed my outlook on our history and race and all those different things. So that really brought me into this work that we are here to talk about today. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pablo Muriel.
Hi, my name is Pablo Muriel. I'm born and raised in the Bronx, in the South Bronx. I became a teacher 21 years ago, and for the same reasons, similar reasons. I came from the community. I felt that I needed to come back and change things. I saw the inequalities, going from living in the South Bronx to going to Hofstra University. The inequalities were very much in your face. So I felt that I needed to be part of a change. How do you change things? The one thing that I identified 21 years ago was education. So I kind of dedicated my life to not only coming back to the community to teach the community, but also to convince the community that the only way to get out of our problem is for us to keep coming back and replicating that, more of us, sort of like everyone else on the panel here. So that's what I've been doing, and hopefully my experience can contribute something of value to this program.
All right, and also joining us, the youngest member of the panel is Mr. Dennis Morales. Dennis?
My name is Dennis Morales. I was a student activist since high school. I mean, since as long as I can remember, but it kind of really started gear off in high school, and I kind of took that student activism with me and really took it to college, where I went to Hofstra University. I pursued a BA in history. Similar to what the other panelists were saying, I seen the injustices in my community growing up, and I kind of took a similar route to Pablo, where I went the education route. Then I went and got my master's at Hofstra, and kind of focusing my support now as being a student activist in the community, but using I am the youngest on the panel, but using my age to kind of tell the students that it's okay to come back to your community, you could be here, you could make a change, because they're like, oh, I want to get out, but if you get out, you guys are the good ones, and what happens when you don't come back, so that's kind of why I've been doing, and I teach at Taft High School in the South Bronx. I wanted to teach back where I started, and that's what I'm doing.
All right, and Dennis, you have a special relationship to Dr. Muriel, is that correct?
Yeah, so I was also I was Pablo's high school student, so it kind of activism started through Pablo, through his pedagogy, and it kind of started to I wouldn't say it scoped me into being a history teacher, but it kind of did help me figure out what I wanted to do, because when he met me at first, I wanted to be an engineer, then a lawyer. And when I went to college, I decided that education was the route for me. And it really helped me becoming an activist in high school, being more involved in my community with like Congress members and seeing that I can actually make a change if I speak up. That's all where it started, right? I think he's still in Smith, so it's in that building right there, right in that building.
All right, fair enough. All right, so we're here this evening in part to honor the legacy of Shirley Chisholm. I'm going to throw this question out to all of you, and you can answer in turn. So how do you understand the legacy of Shirley Chisholm? So what does it mean to you, and in what ways do you think that the work that you do reflects her legacy?
Yeah, I think, as someone who grew up in Brooklyn, grew up in a Caribbean house, a lot of people don't know that Shirley Chisholm is actually from a child of Caribbean roots. Her father's actually from Guyana, her mother's from Barbados. So growing up in a very strict Caribbean house, you always learned and heard the stories, especially growing up in Crown Heights. You always heard the stories of Shirley Chisholm, and my grandmother was a big fan of hers, and so it always passed down. So when I began to look at what I wanted to do with my life, first it was the usual route. My uncle was a cop. He's like, become a cop and do your 20 years and then get out. And then when I got really activated in high school, when I was in high school, Barack Obama was just running to become president of the United States, and that sort of propelled me into a little more activism role. I was a very talkative kid growing up, and always got in trouble, but I learned how to use and give my voice actual purpose. So Shirley Chisholm was someone who we always idolized and looked up to, and someone who really set the golden standard when it came to representing your community and sort of being, her famous tagline of sort of unbought and unbossed, and really sort of made sure that when you wanted to represent your community, like I'm seeking to do now, that you're unbought and unbossed. There's a lot of factors out there in the world. I know I think Dennis and I are probably the same age. I think we're, I just turned 30 a few months ago. And I think just looking back at my life and the story of Shirley Chisholm, it's a great parallel, because she's someone who came through adversity, not just as a person of color, but a woman of color. So she definitely got the double tax of that. And then living in this world as a Black man, is definitely a difficult time to be alive. But we have to keep fighting it every day. And I use my voice and the privilege that I have to be in this position, because not a lot of the kids that I grew up with are dead or in jail or don't have this opportunity. So I know that I'm blessed. I use this voice and my opportunity to amplify their stories.
Anyone else want to share on that? All right, fair enough. One of the themes that seems to have come out through the introduction of you guys sharing your stories is the importance of education and your educational experience in motivating you to engage your community and to do the work that you do. How important do you think it is that we incorporate questions of social justice and civic engagement in the school system in order to use the school system as a stimulus for generating more of you, basically? Dr. Murray?
I believe I might be wrong, I'm sorry, it's a personal opinion, but I believe it's the only avenue that we have. Looking at it from the perspective of someone who's coming from, the South Bronx, and seeing this level of, I don't want to call it a vicious cycle, but it's not enough. I think the best way to put it is, in high school, I read a book called Down These Mean Streets by Peary Thomas, which was made in the 1960s about the 1930s. And I read it in 1996. And then during COVID, I decided, let me pull it out again and read it. And it was so relevant to today that it was scary. We're talking over 100 years, and this vicious cycle continues. And I think political is definitely a way, as the gentleman is doing, I think that's exemplary. And I think we definitely need that. But we also need, more teachers to come back. The kids need to see themselves in those people. And I think, when we talk about, activism, I think in of itself is a revolution when you're looking at people who, statistically speaking, are not supposed to make it. And it looks like everyone on this panel is part of that statistics. And we all beat the statistic. So the question is, how do we replicate it? And I'm sure that everyone on here, similar to myself, education was it. So if we can replicate that before they try to destroy with charter schools, I think it's important. And I think again that's I'm sorry I'm going off, but I think it's one of the only ways.
I'd like to also add, and I think you definitely said everything on point, uh, Dr. Muriel. I think that's exactly what we all need to hear. And just to add my piece to it is that for me, it began in the classroom. It began in the college classroom in terms of just being able to receive an understanding of social justice and our history and the real truth that we were never fully told or taught in school growing up. So it's hugely important that this is something that is in the curriculum. We see it today where there's this ongoing debate as to whether we should teach people about the history, and there's so much fighting around that, and it's still going on, and it's like, well, do we want to make this side feel this way? Do we want? But at the end of the day, the truth has to be told. So I see that debate coming up, and I think we all know, what's the purpose behind that. So it's just another way to suppress and repress certain histories and understanding in order for the things that we're seeing today that we're fighting against to continue. And so why not have the education start in the schools? Why not have it start from a very young age? So I think it's hugely important. And I also feel that because it's in that kind of a community setting and it's with others who are in the same age group and who probably have similar lifestyles, it will actually make the students feel as if they're not isolated. Like, I thought I was going into this school with these issues alone, but just because this was taught today or this week, I'm now hearing other people with the same issues. So we need to remember that in many ways, because a lot of these situations out here will leave us feeling isolated. So when we can bring the history back and we can show that it's you, it's me, it's all of us that live in this kind of an area or what have you, then it brings that it mobilizes people, it organizes them, and it allows us to actually be a more forceful force, and a forceful force that can actually go out and make change. And that's what we want to do, right? So just that's just my thoughts on that. I could go on and on, but we don't have the time.
Fair enough. I want to ask a follow-up question, and still staying on this line of thought. So Ms. Williams, like, you spoke about the content, right? But the content is taught fairly regularly across the board. There must be something different about the experience, whatever it was, that sparked you to go beyond the fact that you learned that there was injustice, that you learned that there were problems. There had to have been some additional component that triggered each of you to become these change agents, to become these actors, to dedicate your lives in essence to the service of others and your community. And so I'm asking you to reflect a little bit in terms of your educational experience. Like, what exactly was it about that particular history class that you mentioned, Miss Williams, or in your case, Dennis, what was it about sitting through Dr. Muriel's class or whatever? So there had to be some additional component, because I think you're all right. I think that education is key to driving and motivating people to get more involved. but we have to figure out what the secret ingredient is. So obviously the ingredient is not just the textbook. It's not just the curriculum. There must be something else to it. And I'm going to add a second part to that question as you think about that. So one of the things that I find strikingly odd about, and here we're talking about the New York City public school experience. I have colleagues who and friends who live just a few miles north of the city in Westchester and Putnam and some of the other counties. And I speak to them of their children, and they say, you know, my child is graduating and she's out doing community service because community service is required for my student to graduate. And they turn to me and say, so, and what are your children, you know, doing for their community service? And I always feel a little uncomfortable having to remind them that we don't have that as a requirement. So I want you to reflect on that as well. And why is it that our public school education doesn't seem to, across the board as a whole? So yes, there are pockets. For certain, there's, you know, individuals like Dr. Muriel and your instructor here in CUNY. But what seems to, why is it that we seem to have neglected this idea in New York City, which is supposed to be a progressive city? So we're not a conservative city that's saying that we're going to fight against critical race theory. But nonetheless, if you go into the communities that are saying they'll fight against critical race theory, they are teaching their young people to be more involved, but we are not. So what seems to be the disconnect in your opinions?
Just as a reminder, the New York Times last year, or the year before, put out a whole study that New York City is the most segregated school system in the entire country. So today, for example, I'm teaching about segregation in the South, and then I asked my students, have you ever been in a segregated school? And I do this every year. And the kids go, no, that's crazy, segregated school. And then I ask them, okay, how many white kids are in our school? And I wait. And then they mention one or two kids, and I say, no, he's not white, he's Puerto Rican. We don't have any white kids. We're a segregated school. But the kids don't realize that themselves, because how can you realize something you don't know? So, you know, I just want to point that piece out.
Yeah, and Dr. Moria put up I want to also touch on that as well, is that it's like teachers and professors like Dr. I think something about either history teachers or global study teachers, something like that, but they always seem to strike a chord. And when I was in high school, it was Mr. Michael Klinger. He was my global studies at that time teacher, and I think we spent 90% of the class not talking about Mesopotamia. We were talking about you know, Columbine and segregation, all these different issues that because he grew up in sort of the, you know, the 70s and 80s, and he wanted to impart in us sort of, you know, to think outside of the box. So he challenged us and sort of lit a fire in a lot of us who thought school was boring and global was boring. Like, who the hell cares about Mesopotamia and all these other things? But he sort of really changed the dynamic. And I think we need more teachers to have the freedom to teach outside the box and not teach to a test. But and also to a lot of teachers want to be able to inspire their students. So I think if we allow more teachers to inspire their students, then we'll be in a much different space than we are now. I think what we're missing is the inspiration. It's much more. I think the school system. I want to say public school. I think even higher education. It's an assembly line. It's a manufacturing line. If you don't fit in this box, then we got to figure something out for you. I think if we give people like Dr. Morial or Mr. Klinger, who was my global teacher, if we give them more freedom to actually inspire kids, you'll see much more. We don't need any more politicians. We don't need any more. But if we had more people who were just inspired to really just, you know, love their community and actually be part of their community, a lot of the issues that we see today wouldn't exist.
Yes. And can I jump in here? I wasn't sure.
Sure.
Guys,
Absolutely.
Sorry, Monique Chandler Waterman. I was out and about, Caribbean American, first generation Caribbean American. My parents were Barbados and Jamaica. So I reflect a lot on what Shirley Chisholm has taught us with her roots as well. But just to tag what Jelani is saying, a lot of times we're teaching to a test. As an educator myself, that realm wasn't for me. That's why I started doing after school programs, pushing programs, coaching enrichment. So there's something called project-based assessment, which is there's a school that I taught at that they got rid of the regents and they fought and advocated to have project-based assessment where there's more than one way to measure a child. So if you're looking at, they had to do community service. They did a venture week when they went out into the woods and they slept out in the woods. Then they had to go out into the community and do things of community work. That was integrated into their actual curriculum. So when you failed the class, you didn't have parent-teachers conference. You had student-led conference. And you had to choose your peers. You have your parents, whoever you want on your panel. And you had to say, why did I get a 55? What am I going to do to make sure I don't fail the class? And you actually got a grade based on even you just talking about your failures and how you're going to improve, because life's about wins, losses, failures, success, and we let the child look at the whole entire child. We all cannot just take a test and be able to pass it. That should not be the only measurement for a child. So I believe that when it comes to the teacher, they don't have creativity when it comes to the curriculum. I spend more time doing administrative tasks than actually working with the students, trying to develop them, speaking to their parents, holistically dealing with the whole child. So we've gotten away from a lot of those core things because it's so test measurement ridden. And we don't learn like that. We learn hands-on. We learn different in multiple ways. We got to make sure that the curriculum fits the students, not the students fit in the curriculum. And when we change that dynamic, then we will have a better we will have more involvement in the community. They need to have skill set and learn stuff that they could able to deal with life issues, conflict resolution, conflict mediation. We have gun violence issues. We have a lot of that stuff. How do we teach our children how to deal with real life situations? Because they live in real life issues. They're having housing issues. There's no equity in education. They have a whole public health crisis that's going on. We need to teach them to that and put the tools into them that we need them to be successful. Stop telling them to be successful. Show them how.
Okay. And in response to that, so sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
Oh, I was gonna answer that. I was in Pablo's class maybe 6-7 years ago. So I'm still relatively fresh to discuss this part of it, but I can discuss like part of what hit, like being in his classroom that kind of led me to be an activist. It all started like one thing that if you don't know, most of you guys know about Alfred E. Smith High School or any high schools that have metal detectors, and I had a very big thing with metal detectors. Not that it wasn't like promoting safety or anything like that. It wasn't anything about that. People always misunderstood what I was saying. People thought that I wanted to get rid of them and remove them. That wasn't really the message. The message was like, why are they being strategically placed here versus other schools? And we were upset about it. The students of Smith, Pablo's students, and we were like we were tired of it. And we walked into his class and we were like, yo, we're upset about this. Like, we're tired of these metal detectors. Like I had to take off my Timberland boots. Everybody knows Timberland boots are like, they got the 2-inch thick sole that make it look like, you got to take them off. And we didn't want to take them off because the floors already had snow on it. So we were upset. And we walked into his class and he like noticed that everybody was upset. And he asked us like, oh, what's wrong? And we told him, like, we walked into his class, like first period, it's like, we're tired of having to walk the metal detectors. Like our socks is wet now. They want to search us because they think we have a gun. Like nobody has a gun. We go to CT high school. We have weapons if we want to use them, but we don't use them. It's a place for education. They're always treating us like criminals. Pablo just looked at us and was like, so what are you going to do? And we was just like, what? What do you mean what we're going to do? We don't know what to do. Like, he was like, you have a voice. You can, you can do stuff. You can say something, you can, choose to use your voice. You can figure it out. What can you do? And we just sat there and was like, oh, well, nobody ever asked us what we can do. They just be like, they tell us something and we just calm down and it's back to class. So, do what you gotta do. Go about your business. And it wasn't like that. So he asked us, it was like the beginning of the year. And then as we keep going through it, we keep going through his curriculum and he's like, we're learning about the Bill of Rights because we're in U.S. history class and we're looking at it like this happened a couple weeks ago. Like, damn, we asked ourselves like, is there a student Bill of Rights? And I looked at my friend, we looked at each other like, I'm gonna try to find one. So during lunch was like, we went to ask like, where's the Student Bill of Rights or anything like that. Nobody would tell us. Nobody knew what it was. So then we kept looking, and we went to like the dean's office, like, you know, where all the kids, you know, they get, it's like this blue book. Everybody knows, like a blue book for the DOE. When you get in trouble, you send the dean's office and they give you that. You read it, find out why, you know, how you get in trouble, everything like that, how all the protocols. And we looked at it, we opened it, and it said like Student Bill of Rights. And we found out we had rights inside the building. We was like, oh, we have rights inside the building. That's crazy. We didn't even know this. So we sat there and we looked at it and we brought it back to Pablo, and he's like, well, you got rights now. What are you going to do? So that kind of was like the first start of it, you know, like he taught us, like he used it, you know, and then as we started to learn, looking back at it now, like as a teacher, you know, he was like kind of probing and like, you know, but he wasn't really telling us what to do. He was just asking us questions, and we were asking questions like, oh, what do you do? He's like, well, you have the Bill of Rights, like read it, figure out what you're going to do with it. You have it. And he went about his business like teaching us like what to do with the regular, just regular curriculum. Like he was teaching us about the Constitution, about the Bill of Rights. And we're just like, oh, so this is what you do. And then we learned that you can say something, you have a voice, like there's people talk about, there's like, it has to be proposed, there's bills. And I'm like, oh, so we could do all of this stuff. We have like an actual voice in the community. So that's kind of where it really started, like right in his classroom where the activism goes. And it kind of kept going and more as he kept teaching us. And he has this thing where, I mean, I didn't know at that time, but now looking back at it, it's like the C3 framework, right? Where you're looking at like, you know, how do you promote college and civics in a classroom? And we would go out, and one of the assignments was like, go to your community board meeting, you know, be a part of the community. So we was like, oh, we're going to our community board meeting. So we went to our community board meeting. And the biggest thing that we remember was like, that it was like they were trying to kick out homeless people because they wanted to eat the donuts that were there. And those were people of the community. We was like, so we get to be here, but they don't. And we was like, oh, that's crazy. And then we just sat there, and they were just like, they just sat there, and it was like, yeah, so how are we going to clean up all the homeless people in the street? That's what the whole big thing was in the South Bronx. Like, we would just go there. And I'm like 15, 16 years old. Like, so I go here, and all they worried about is homeless people and getting them off the street because they're like terrorizing the neighborhood. That's what they said. And we're just like, but homeless people have no home. Where they're supposed to go, you know? So we got curious about it. So we started to visit other community board meetings, and we visited one in like by on the north side of the Bronx by like Morris Park. And we went into there, and we was invited, you know, it's free. We got to go, you know, you just go into the community board meeting. And we went and we sat there. It was very organized. There was a bunch of people. It was a whole different environment. It was like, it really like shook us. We was like, oh, so we went to the one in our neighborhood, and it was just like 4 people there, a couple of people on the couple homeless people eating donuts, walking out, them kicking them out, and it was just done. And then we went into this other one, and it's like, oh, like these people are actually in here for a fight. Like they're using their voice, and they were fighting over a flagpole. There's like people came in there from the school, and people were like, these students need a flagpole in the building, like in front of there, right next to the playground. They need a flagpole. They need to see the American flag. And I'm just like, and we're just arguing about homeless people in this one in the South Bronx. And that was like one of the initial starts of like, you know, how we use like the education and how he really used like the classroom space. And it all started with a homework assignment, like just joining. He never even told us, like, he said, oh, you went, tell us how it went. That's it. And, you know, he never really went. We just kept going back to the other ones and kept sharing them. And that was like the start with a lot of the people in my high school, where we were really first started to like get involved in our community and realize that we did have a voice and we can make a change. We just have to go out there and use it.
So, Dennis, the story you just told is a story of empowerment, right? So there you are, you're a young person, you have something that's bothering you, there's something going on in your environment, physical environment, your community being the school, that is troubling to you for one reason or the other. And so what Dr. Muriel did in his own way was to empower you to say, hey, go look up these rights, go see, you know, think about what it is you can do. So this question I'm throwing out to those of you who are the community organizers on the panel. So how do we do that outside of the classroom setting? So we started off talking about, you know, the importance of educators in terms of planting the seed in individuals. But now we take this out of the classroom and we're talking about the communities, the larger community. And the same scenario is playing out perhaps minus the empowerment, or you may correct me and say, and tell me that, no, I've missed it. So how do we go about, and I'm asking each of you to speak from your personal experiences and the work that you've done. Because at the end of the day, I think this is essential to any growth, sustainable growth in the communities. How do we go about empowering the citizens who are not in the college classroom, who are not, sitting in one of our sessions, who are not lucky enough? Because this is understanding, it's the luck of the draw that allowed Dennis to end up being connected to Pablo, and Jelani to his global studies teacher, and Miss Williams to the faculty member. So how do you guys go about trying to empower the citizens in our community to understand what Dennis just explained? So how do we teach them that lesson, that you do have rights, and that there are mechanisms through which you can exercise those rights to address issues which concern you, and equally as important, to improve the quality of your life. Mrs. Chandler Waterman, I'd like to throw it out to you first.
Yeah. So I was trying to think of which story. So on a group, we have a block where I organize block associations, and normally they say the young people are causing so much issues and a lot of problems. So what I do is I will utilize those kids who have the most influence, everybody's talking about them, and figure out what's the needs on the block, and then get them to organize so they'll help distribute. We'll come around an issue and they'll say, well, you know what? The first thing I normally start with is a block cleanup. It might sound corny, but the effort of cleaning up physically the block help cleanse the mind and spiritually. So what we do is I'll organize with them, ask them what they need. They'll tell me all the support that they are looking for. We'll start with the block cleanup. They will literally go to every neighbor, especially the neighbors that have this complaint about them and the seniors, and then they will say, do you have garbage to throw out? We'll help you. We have the truck coming in the morning. They'll give out those flyers. Then they will go back in the morning, and then we all together collectively come and throw out the garbage. Then the resources that they ask for, we put that and line the streets with it. So we bring it right to their doorstep, having them involved in the process. So those who they may think is the ones that's not wanted in the community, that has the issues, we did something called a Safety Alliance, where we went up to a particular area that had substance abuse, they had drug dealers there, they had gun violence, they have different things in the neighborhood. They have gang activity. We spoke from the gangs. We spoke to the ones that were using and abusing drugs. Everyone was involved in the conversation. We asked them, what do you need? We came up with a list of resources. We had those who were using and abusing drugs. I need this parking spot be held because we're going to have the intervention truck come here. They helped us hold that spot. They told us what they needed. We showed them how to do overdose intervention prevention training. If someone overdosed, what do you do? The people that wanted jobs, they wanted to work in the unions, we got them there. They helped us organize. They was able to give out. So having everybody, all community stakeholders at the table, let them be part of it. And we called it a Safety Alliance, which came out of Brownsville. Inspector Anderson, the 73rd Precinct, he came up with this idea that was led by the precinct, but the community was the ones at the table, because you cannot police and criminalize every activity. So I brought those same young men from one community over to Brownsville. They learned the model, they helped chose the location, and then we brought it back to our community, and we was able to execute that. So meeting people where they act, find out what they need, and involve them in what they're interested in. The people that they complain about most in the community, whether it's drugs or gang activity, they have the most influence. Utilize them in their skill set to help them make the change. And when they see the change happening and how we can benefit them and helping others, and if you look at them as human beings and not judge them and figure out what they need, to me, that is how we get everyone involved, not just in a school environment, but just in everyday quality of life. We all have the same issues. We want affordable housing. We want equity in education. When it comes to public health, we want to be safe. Nobody wants to walk down the street really holding a gun. That's not what we want to do. We're not born criminals. So just bring them back to the base of how can you affect change, impact change, show them, and then continue supporting them. We got to just continue pouring into our community with resources, access, and know-how. How do you do it? How do you get that support? Just because there's services, that don't mean we know how to obtain them. So we brought it right to their door.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, sound like you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, no, really quickly. I think what was just said was basically where I was going with my response as well. I think it's really important, again, just to be really brief, to bring ourselves to the community, but not to necessarily throw up on the community, but to really hear from them, right? To really sit with them and hear what their issues are, what is it that they need. Because a lot of times, and I'm trying not to be criticizing in this moment, but so many times we really want to get some points across. We really want to impact and change. And we go in with a great, wonderful strategic idea, but sometimes people hearing that it's too much for them in that moment and they just want to be heard. And then we can reassess and figure out how to use those ideas that we came up with in the beginning to then assess it to their needs. So I think it's really important that we do that, hear them out, but also political education is really another key piece. Again, the schools, the inside the classrooms are always a good way to go, but it's just as good to be able to just I sometimes imagine just seeing like someone on their steps at home outside and like a few other friends join them, and that one friend who was out first in the steps has a book reading, and the few friends join and they're all reading the same book and they're just there having a small political education that they won't learn in the schools per se. So I feel that it's really important for us to dig up those books that are a lot of time a lot of times banned, those books that we don't get to read those histories and really sit with each other and be able to just have those circles. And I agree again with what was just mentioned, where we go to them and we help them in their communities. I think the cleanup aspect was very excellent. I remembered that in the Young Lords history, where they were able to bring the media attention to what was happening in their neighborhoods, and it forced the garbage cleanup to start to take place there. You think about the many ways the Black Panthers and other similar like organizations came together to serve the community and not so much bring things to them that they wanted, but serve. And then you begin to form those alliances that really, after a while, it's hard to break them, because at that point um, people are so bought in and supportive of what's happening that they're now seeing the bigger picture, and rather than fighting with each other, they begin to come together and make that change. So those are a few ideas. Again, I feel that it's so important to just talk with people, right? And it doesn't have to be like a big group going into the communities every Saturday or every Sunday. It could just be you who feels frustrated, and then you have a conversation that spreads like wildfire with other groups of friends. And that can be ways to, really begin to resolve some issues and take it from there.
All right, Mr. Deshawn, I would like to hear your response, and then immediately following your response, I have a follow-up question that I'm going to first pose to you, and then open up to the others.
Got
Okay?
it. Yeah,
So,
no,
go for it.
I think Sophia and I think Monique hit it dead on the head. I think also what we are also acknowledging is that we come from communities where immigration status is always a problem, and people are scared to get involved because of the lack of security or safety around their citizenship status. And being a part of community board, you don't have to be a citizen. Being a part of your precinct council or your tenant association or your block association, you don't have to be a citizen. But I think sometimes there's a lot of fear when it comes around being active and being present in the community, because a lot of people don't want to cause trouble because, hey, I'm working on my green card, or Uncle Santos or Auntie upstairs is not, the papers ain't right, so we got to take it easy. I grew up in that. My mom, just became a citizen a few years ago. I grew up in the world thinking my mom was the oldest citizen because she always made sure that we, was involved, and I would go vote with my grandfather. So I was like, all right, my mother's a citizen. And then when I hit like 16, I realized, I was like, Mom, how come I never see you vote? And she was like, oh, I'm not a citizen. I was like, wait, what? So even things like that, as someone who, always had access, she was friends with all the politicians. She was friends with Yvette. I mean, I've known Yvette and Una Clark my entire life. And, I grew up in that political sphere. So I always thought like, oh, my mom is this big political person. I'm like, great. So when I found out, even my mom wasn't a citizen, but even though she was still active, but I think a lot of people in our communities, we are also scared. They're also scared to get involved because of the lack of. And we saw that during the census process, where we were going out knocking on doors trying to talk to people, and people were scared to just tell us how many people actually lived in their homes. And even during, and Monique can attest to this, when we're going out door knocking and just talking to people and just saying like, hey, listen, I'm not here for your vote. I'm just here to just what's going on in your community. What do you need? They're also afraid to talk. So there's a lot of things that sometimes we're missing because people are just afraid. And we have to address that fear. But, that comes from the federal government all the way down. And the former president, Mr. Trump, sort of stoked the fears as well. So a lot of people were already terrified, and he further stoked the fears, and a lot of people just went hiding. So I think people have to realize that you would be sitting watching this or hearing my voice to be part of the community. You don't have to be a citizen. Once you're here, you live in. Some people are paying taxes and all these different things. You're here and you're part of the community, and you're deserving of resources just like I'm deserving. I got lucky that I was born here. And had this opportunity to be here and be safe, and don't have to worry about taking a test to become a citizen. But all the services that are afforded to me should also be afforded to you. And people just have to realize that, listen, there are services out there. Don't be scared. Be engaged. And also, you live in we call it the most progressive city in the world. There's a few things I'll disagree with that on, but there's definitely a lot of protections here in New York. We are a safe haven city and safe haven state. There's a lot of things that are here that are organizations like CAMBA and East Flatbush Village that do really good work that we will protect you and provide for you. So I want people to if there's one thing that after all of this is we all got friends who may not have citizenship or whatever, let them know there are services out there. They could be part of the community board. They could show up. They could speak. The precinct council. You could go to the precinct council meeting every week and say, listen, I live on Carroll Street, and the 2 houses down, those guys out there every night causing trouble. And guess what? They'll show up because that's what they're there for. So utilize those civic organizations, civic groups, and be part of it, because we need you guys to really educate us. I can only do it the best that I can do, even not running for office in my various roles, working at downstate, working for the governor, working in city council. In order for us to provide better for you, we have to hear from you, and that's the citizen or not. We have to provide for everyone here.
And I knew you were going to lead me into the perfect segue. So I love the way that I set that up. So here's my follow-up question for you. It's evident that there's a growing sense of distrust in our communities for official agencies, right? And official agencies of all sorts, it seems. So, for example, during the pandemic, when the federal government and other agencies, New York State, attempted to provide support to small businesses in our communities. One of the things that immediately became evident and problematic was that we discovered that something along the lines of 80 to 90% of minority-owned businesses didn't have a relationship with any financial institutions because they didn't trust financial institutions. And we find the same, the same thing with other entities as well. So how do we go about addressing this? I mean, so even in terms of information. So going back to the pandemic, right? So the government's efforts to share reliable information about the pandemic, worked well across the nation. But when you look at our communities, didn't work well at all because people didn't trust that the government was giving them reliable information. People didn't trust that the government was looking out for their interests. So how do we address that? How do we address this sense of distrust such that it would even allow, as you were suggesting, these residents to engage with entities, to engage with the police, to engage with the healthcare system, to engage with you for that matter, in an official capacity?
Yeah, listen, that's a great question, Ken. I think the the fear and the distrust are founded. If I didn't myself operate within the system, there's sometimes I distrust the system as well. And I think what that breeds out to is when you have a government that at least in my opinion, we've seen so many. The government has played a role in destabilizing black and brown communities for generations. So I think what needs to happen is a recognition from the government,
Moses.
or at least
talk about Robert Moses.
yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. Where they use, where for generations you've seen them literally tear communities apart. Either by building a road or supplying guns and drugs. And I think until we see an actual tangible step forward, at least a recognition from the government that listen, for generations, which is never going to happen, and because I think the government operates in the way it operates. But I think what the biggest thing that I've seen is where government is succeeding, and this is the sort of the reason why I decided to get involved and decided to run for myself, is that I think there's a feeling that government is not for us. And
how do we change that?
And I think what needs to happen, I think more people need to take a look holistically at what government. I think it's going to take it's not a panacea. I think it's so many layers upon layers and generational scarring and trauma that we have to unpack. And it's not between education, even from education or just working in the real world. I think it's such a difficult, at least for me, to comprehend. But I think what needs to happen is that we need to at least first work on ourselves. And I'll say this as someone who has existed. I think what we need to realize, at least at a local level, we need to realize the importance of unity. And I think once we realize how powerful we are as a collective, then we can work on building the outside influences that impact our daily lives. I think we've seen, especially within the Black diaspora, I'll say, you have the Caribbean community, and you have the African American community, and then you have the Africans who just can't, so there's so many, even within the Black community, so many different sects and infighting, that if we don't take the time to really work and coalesce and be a real unit, we can never truly address the distrust that we have for internal factors that are out there. And I think it's going to take a while for us to regain the trust that we have, because we have to work internally. We have to work together to be a unit. I worked for 4.5 years in the Jewish community, and I saw they would disagree on Tuesday, and on Wednesday they're all coming together, say, hey, this is not right, we got to do this, and they're voting for that, and they're doing this. And I think once we have to, as a community, and I'll let Monique jump in, because Monique does a lot of Monique and I have worked a lot on different issues, but I think what's most important is the unity aspect of it. I think if we're not unified as a people, we can't expect then government to then be in service of us. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen, either working at city council level, federal level, statewide level. If we're not together as a unit on the local level, at least within our own communities, then we can't expect government to really be sort of representative and really be at least hearing what we want them to hear from us. And that's just my view, and I'm happy. I want to stir a conversation. That's why I'm leaving it to open.
Yeah, I see that. Ms. Miller, Dr. Miller, I see your hand, but since Mrs. Chandler Waterman was invited to follow up, I'm going to allow her to go first, and I'm going to throw a little pebble into the water again. Right? We talk a lot about unity, but unity ranks right up there for me with salvation, right? Like, they're great ideals. The question is it real? Is it attainable? So I'm going to throw that into the mix of this question, because it seems to me that given the years of struggle, and I don't want to give away my next question yet, unity has been a flag that we've been waving for a long time. I'm not sure that we've gotten any closer to it, and I'm not sure that it's that we are in fact getting any closer to it. And I hope you guys are gonna, and tell me I'm wrong, because I'm as you guys can see, I'm getting gray, and with the gray comes a little skepticism, right? So, Mr. Chandler Waterman, like, what is your point of view on?
We'll get closer to it when you elect people that's like-minded, like myself and John, right?
All right. I like the pitch.
Yes, but you have to, for real, you have to really get people that represent your interests, right? So what I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go back a little bit. So Jelani, mom taught my daughter, right? So I want to thank her for that. Yeah. So she helped pour into my kids, and my daughter had her own opinion very strong, and I felt comfortable going to work every day at City Council Member Jamani Williams' office because his mom had her on the manners. She understood her and let her express herself. And she's 16 years old today, and she remembers when she was in pre-K, who had her back and who allowed her, that her voice is out there. And she realizes that her is power in voice. So I want to make sure I gave homage to Miss Charmaine DeShong. I had to say that real quick. But fear and distrust. What Jelani said is very important. We have to work on ourselves as a people. Unfortunately, we've been ripped from our culture, years and years, decades and decades, century of oppression and slavery. So the system is working exactly how they designed it, not for us. Take away the black man from the family. If it wasn't from the slavery, now is jails, and is now lack of jobs, lack of all these different things that we have. But basically, educating the community members also on their civic duty, but educate them on what does an elected official do, how they support us, what is the government doing for us. Let them explain to them whether you are a citizen or not, what rights you have. I will do that by having a civic, like Diana Richardson, right? Having a civic minded meeting and making sure our community member understand that at the core value. And that's what's happening. When we talk about unity, we have to realize we can't talk about a public health crisis. There's gun violence happening in the street, and then we're acting like gang members when it comes to politics. Well, whose territory is this? Who's that? We're not working together in fighting and all that, like Jelani mentioned. We need to realize there's a bigger picture. A 12-year-old was murdered in this community. If that's not enough to unify the community on around these issues that's happening, I don't know what it's going to take. We're going to trust government when we see leadership reflecting our local leaders, reflecting what we need in our community, which is people to just care about each other, put the power back into the people. Let's focus on the people and not so much politics. When I'm running for office now for the New York State Assembly in District 58. My mentor was Assemblymember Nick Perry, who's now the ambassador. Right? I watch how he do things. I watch how he worked. And Jamani Williams, also my mentor. Jamani, in the Caribbean household, we don't trust politicians. They all liars. But those two show me something. I was on the ground from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. with Jamani Williams on the streets, trying to cure gun violence, trying to reduce the violence, speaking to people, caring. I said, wow, you could be a real person, do real things, and run for office and be an elected official. Having those people in office that really represent who we are, showing the united front. Not everybody's going to get it, but if you model the behavior that you need to see in your community and have that in your elected official, that's gold. And it starts by educating yourself on who to vote for. What have they did 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Have they been consistent in the work, not just around campaigning? So I would say that those things, Jelani hit on a strong point, but unity, we are going to get close to unity. Every time you elect someone in office cannot be bought and sold on boss, right? Like Shirley Chisholm said, every time we do that, we get closer to the victory. I can't say that Shirley Chisholm did all of this, come from Barbados. My fans from Barbados as well. My daughter go to Brooklyn College, early educator like myself, that she did all of that, fought for us to get to this point, and we're not getting closer. We're getting closer to unity. We just need to look within our power, our human power, our power of the people, our voices, and making sure that we put that to vote. Even if you're not a citizen, there's ways that you can help to get to that goal of getting the right people in office by helping out. And then we get closer to unity. There's a lot of division in our community, but I don't give up hope. We can unite. There's good people out there running for office that's going to make change, and we just got to make sure we get the right people in.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in on this?
Just very quickly. because I'm thinking, Sarah, I'm just looking at it from a more educational, like, standpoint in a high school, from a high school and sort of college standpoint. Um, Critical literacy is an excellent tool, which I've been using for years. Critical literacy is basically uh, looking at literacy from a critical standpoint, from not the eyes of necessarily the winner, but the eyes of possibly the workers, or the margins, right? And critical pedagogy, it's by Paulo Freire, and it makes people uncomfortable. You
I'm glad
cannot.
you said that. I'm glad you said it, because there's a whole push against all elements of critical thinking.
Yes, yes, because the whole idea, it's literally fighting the structures, the power structures. So, the C3 framework that Dennis mentioned a few minutes ago allows teachers to sort of push beyond the bounds of the school building. I forgot about that C3 until you mentioned it. You could literally, like, for example, and again, going to the idea of how to get people not to be scared. That's what I'm getting to. I give you a perfect example. Once people are exposed to something for any particular reason, and they're exposed to it, the first time is always scary, and after that, it becomes habitual. I look at Dennis, and when they first started going to the community board meetings, right? I didn't expect much. Just go and be exposed. I didn't know that he was going to be a Gates Millennium Scholar. I didn't know that that was going to lead him to get accepted to Yale, and he decided to go to Hofstra. I didn't know he was going to end up a teacher. But all of those things sort of led to that moment because he was exposed. Prior to that, I had students during Occupy Wall Street that I had a parent come in and flip out that her daughter was missing for 3 days. The cops were called and everything. Come to find out, she was staying in Occupy Wall Street. She was living in Zuccotti Park for 3 days. And now she sings with Wyclef Jean of the Fugees. She's a singer. It's his singer, actually. So and this is a young lady who who really wasn't into politics at all or any of that, and was living on Wall Street, right? And just recently, this is the last thing I'm going to say, just so you guys can get the idea. And it just happened like right now. That's one of my lessons. I had the kids write letters. First, I wanted them to first identify their elected officials. Who are they? They're very, very, very easy. Who's your governor? Who's your mayor? Who's your assembly person? Who's your state senator? And then I had them go into like GovTrack and all the other government sites to look up bills. And I told them, look up a bill that you want to read that you're interested in. A bunch of kids, and I found this incredible because I have the letters. A bunch of kids, they wrote letters to Richie Torres and to AOC, and they chose things like housing project procurement programs, and they were talking literally like about their personal lives living in the projects and how this bill could change their lives. And then they sent it in, and they recently started getting replies. Now they're all excited that they've been asked to volunteer. And again, these are all minority students, every single one. So and this, I've been replicating this for over 20 years. So what I'm noticing, if you make the kids have to be uncomfortable in your classroom. They have to know that they're in a war and they're losing. They have to know that they walk through here, 149th Street and 3rd, and it's called Asthma Alley by the Guardian, the British Guardian, that surveyed the area and found that this has more asthma than anywhere else in the United States. And when you look at the structures, that's the whole point, is to expose the structures. Well, why is that? Well, you have 165,000 people living in the area, and the last election, only 3,200 people went out and voted. That means that damn near anyone that gets up and can get 1,000 people to follow them could run the place. In fact, AOC, the guy who's running before her lived in Washington, D.C., never came to the Bronx for 18 years and held the position.
Right.
So, and AOC, all she did was knock on that door and knocked hard. Now, I get it. She does have a whole a whole team with her. I get that part. But people need to know that this is possible. The only way they can know that is through being exposed. And they need to be, my kids in my class all know that they're poor. They know it. And it's not because I'm feeding them they're poor. This school has 94% Title I. And I have kids in here who live in shelters who don't know that they don't believe they're poor. So, the social workers will say, you got to be careful. You can't, you're going to break. No, you're not going to break the kid. The kid is already going through the real life. And here, what you got to do is help them make sense of their situation and fix it themselves. Once they get that first taste of it, they continue. So I have a freshman who lives in the projects, wrote this amazing letter. And Richie Torres replied. He said he was going to go looking, and he did. Her apartment has already been fixed, and today she came up to me and told me that finally plastered the walls and everything. She had mold on the walls for over 3 years, a broken window, holes in her ceiling. And it took this letter. And today when she came to me, it's the most beautiful thing. She said, oh my God, can we do more of these things? I said, of course. It's your power now. So it's just a matter of, and it's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work. And then we could get to that part of getting ourselves together. Because I think the part that keeps people behind is the lack of knowledge. When you're afraid of something, you just don't try it. Because whatever you're doing now is working. You're still breathing, you're eating. You don't want to ruin this, So we got to teach folks, at least I believe, that they are the power in their own lives. I tell my kids all the time, no one is coming to rescue you. So it's either you do this, or remember in the United States, it takes 5 generations to go from poverty to the middle class. So the American dream is now in Canada and Finland, who's 4 and 3 generations to get from poverty to middle class. So these are things that need to be exposed.
Great. So I'm going to go back to something that was said a little bit earlier. Are we stuck in a loop? We are in 2022. We've entered into the 21st millennium, and one of the things that I find frustrating, and I do hear this from others, is we are today arguing about and pushing for, fighting for, agitating for many of the same things that were central 5 decades ago. And while I hear the optimism, and optimism is inherent to anyone who is engaged in this type of work, that you must believe. How does your faith measure up against this sense of whether or not we've actually accomplished change? So, I guess my question is that, plus to what degree have we actually materialized meaningful change in our communities and in the outlook of our lives over the past 6 or 7 decades?
Just very quickly, I'm going back to education, but I don't know why we haven't yet gotten rid of property taxes funding for schools. I don't know yet why we haven't fought for fair funding across the state, equal funding across the state. So we could talk all we want about making schools better and education better, but as long as the funding is connected to the community, the school funding, as the richer the neighborhood, the better the school, the higher the scores, the higher the property value, the higher the property value, the higher the taxes, the more funding that school gets. And it's the opposite way in the poor areas. So I do want to have that discussion that you're talking about, Bramble. But my issue with that is we need to get to the structures. We're not attacking structures. We're attacking the surface, but we need to attack the structure from the root. We got to pull it out. And that's one of those, the school funding. I would honestly suggest that's number one thing that needs to happen.
Yeah. Listen, I couldn't disagree more. I think that's why I use my air quotes when I say the most progressive state, because a lot of things that aren't so progressive, I think sometimes we get lost or in that the bubble that we're in New York City, and we're comparing it to like Florida and Texas and other states. Like, yeah, we're maybe more progressive than Texas, but we're definitely not as progressive as we should be, as we claim to be. I think we've witnessed this. I went to public school my entire career. If it wasn't for, as I call Hunter the poor man's Harvard. I went there and I had a great education, and I tell all my family, I say, yo, listen, I don't care about any other CUNY. I don't care. No offense. I said Hunter is where it's at. I said go to Hunter, and you'll have a great education, and you'll leave there debt free. I did, and I have cousins who went to LIU, and I look at them, I'm like, clown. But to Pablo's point is that, we can't claim to be this forward thinking state, and we spent way more money on, building a stadium in Buffalo than we are in education. And I think, and I love Buffalo. I work for the governor, and she's she's a good friend of mine. But I think we have to be real about where we are. The mayor just released his budget. We're going to hire
Well,
500.
her husband has something to do with it.
Hey, I'm there. And then you look at the mayor. He just released his budget. We're hiring. We're going to hire 580 more correctional officers. We're going to hire more police. There's going to be more police in the transit system. And then you look at education. He wants to have a 6% cut across all city agencies. I think that to me is absolutely ridiculous. How could we, be trying to address these issues of crime, and you say, oh, crime is out of control, but we're cutting all the resources that will get us out of this pandemic or epidemic that we've been in. And I think when it comes to Black and Brown communities, we've been struggling with issues for years. It's just that our lighter pigmented friends are now catching up. I remember there was a time where a generation of Black and Brown kids were called crack babies and all kind of things, and instead of treatment, it was like you're going to jail, and then it would have become Sally and May from Long Island. Oh, we got to stop. We have a health pandemic. We gotta get all the resources, and we gotta have safe injection sites and do all the things. You're like, what changed? Just the color of the skin. So I think we need to have a real, and that's why I kept to my earlier point when I said that we have to really be wherever we are in this diaspora, we got to be together, because the system is organized and run the way it's supposed to be run, and that's the way it's going to continue to be run. And we have to really be able to say, hey, this is what we got to focus on over here and do what we got to do. And it starts literally sometimes starts in the classroom, sometimes it starts on the block, but we really got to start like figuring things out and really sort of like challenging the system and really trying to break it down and it starts at the local level.
How exactly do we challenge the system? And so earlier so part of the conversation was that the solution was to elect more people who were like us, who understood us, who came from our communities, who shared our experiences. Okay, but then we end up having a conversation about a mayor who fits that criteria. And we can have the conversation about a president who's fit that criteria. But at the end of it, here's what happened. Which someone said earlier. So those things end up being superficial. They end up being cosmetic. Right. So the fact that you came from our community, the fact that you're of our color, the fact that you can, relate to some of the stuff that's going on, the fact that Trayvon Martin could be my son, right? We're familiar with that quote. But what didn't happen was, and what you guys said, no one attacked the structure. The structure remained the same. So the face changed. The face came, the face went. But if the structure is the same, if the system's the same, and when I was talking about the rhetoric, I was listening to you just now, Mr. Deshaun, I was like, that's exact. I can go back and find you the tapes. That's the exact same language that was used 5 decades ago, right? Like, literally the exact same rhetoric. So at some point in time, we have to reevaluate, it seems to me, right, whether or not we're actually making progress. When I was younger, I for about 5 weeks, I tried to be I tried to be a poet, and got into the spoken word, and then figured out I really wasn't that creative. But the one line that I remember writing, and this was in my true, more radical revolutionary stage, was a phrase about throwing pebbles at an iron fortress, right? And quite often, when I think about all the efforts that we've collectively made to try to address the system, right? That analogy sort of sums up my frustration. It's that, yes, we all got together and we got all of our pebbles together and we organized and we threw them at this huge, iron fortress. But at the end of the day, what did you do? Maybe you scratched it, maybe you didn't. So I guess part of the question is, how do we change? And so we're going to shift to questioning a little bit, but how do we change the narrative? How do we change this dialogue? How do we change the trajectory we are on so that, and I'm going to use a 10-year time frame, all right? So I'm going to use a decade to try and put things in context. How do we go, what do we need to do so that in 2032, this conversation is different? So if I pledge to bring you all back in 2032, right, what is it that we can do, or what strategies do we need to employ to ensure that that conversation is not the same? And I'm going to rant on just a little bit longer, and then I'm going to hand it back to you. During the lockdown and the Black Lives Matter protests and around George Floyd and around the whole relationship between law enforcement and our communities. I went out to several of the protests, but that's not so odd for me. But I took my two oldest daughters, encouraged them to also go out. And someone asked, well, why are you bothering to go out there, and I said, because I don't want, I'm tired, I am part of the generation of stop and frisk. I've been stopped and frisked so many times, that I've lost count, right? I almost took it for granted. In fact, I'll tell a secret. I hope my old boss Roz is not listening. There was a time where I got to work late, 2 or 3 times a week. And I got to a point where I didn't have to give an excuse anymore. She just figured, she's like, those police stopped you again, didn't they? Right? Now, the first 3 or 4 times it was real. I really did get pulled off the train and so on. But then after that, she just assumed it was the pattern, you're a young man with dreadlocks, out there hopping on the train early in the morning. And so I came in late. She was like, they stopped you again, didn't they? And I'm, Roz, you know how it is, right? But I genuinely felt like I do not want my children to experience any of it, because we can play tough all we want. We can say, yeah, we bored and we got through it and all that. But the truth is it hurts. And you don't want that for the next generation. So what can we do meaningfully to change this dialogue? Right. So education is an element. Yes. I heard you guys talk a little bit about public education. I'm sorry, when I say public education, I don't mean the public education system. I mean educating the public about their rights. But is that really enough for us to change this narrative so that we're not stuck in a loop of struggle? Because that, I think becomes pointless.
Yeah, I think Dr. Muriel touched on it earlier. I think complacency. I think we've become a little complacent. I think to my own personal story, I think when the election of Barack Obama, I think everyone said, we elected Barack Obama, okay, hey, black men in the White House, we good. All black issues, we're good. We don't got to worry about it. He's going to take care. We got a black man in there. He's good. And we didn't realize, and then we realized, well, damn, why Barack ain't doing nothing? And it's like, well, Congress, was Republican, Senate was Republican, the Supreme Court was conservative, and people didn't realize that the president's only the figurehead. If you don't got Congress, if you ain't got the Senate, if you don't got the courts, you ain't getting nothing done. And I think a lot of people were like, "Oh," and it happened again. And Uncle, we got Uncle Joe in the White House, and Uncle Joe was like, "Well, I'm going to do this for student loan debt," and I was like, "All right, Uncle Joe, we send you to the White House." And then we're like, "What the hell's going on? Why is nothing getting done?" And he's like, "Hello, he has a slim majority in the House. He barely got the Senate because you got Joe Manchin and Christian Sinema like they're the president." And so if people have to realize that, and I go back to it, but Ken, listen, elections matter. And if you only, and I'm tired of hearing it from my own people that say, "Well, I just vote for president." You
But
think
is it
Joe Biden?
election does that matter, or is it power that matters?
No,
Because
I agree with you a little bit, but I think elections matter because my thing is that people have to realize that Joe Biden does not give a rat's ass what the hell happens on the corner of Eastern Parkway in Utica. He does not.
But he
Joe
doesn't
Biden,
because of a power relationship, right? So I'm sorry to cut you off,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Jelani,
No,
but he doesn't because of a power relationship, right? And what do I mean by a power relationship? Well, he doesn't. You say, well, he doesn't care what happened there. Well, he doesn't care what happens there because if I don't address it, it won't change anything, right? So if on the other hand, if something happens in another community, well, I know that they're going to respond, that they will exercise some of their power, whether it's their financial power, whether it is their voting power, whether it is their power of communication in terms of getting information out and making me look bad, right? But the Black population, the Hispanic population, the poor population, right? As long as they remain marginalized, and we got to stop embracing that term as if it's some kind of badge of honor we can wear. But we have to understand what it means. You're marginalized. It means that you're out there in the periphery. That we don't. So there is no need to care about what your opinion was. I'm going to, I don't want to take the conversation off track, but there was that little blooper that Biden had when he says, "Well, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black," right? And it was a slip, but it was a slip that was driven by an understanding that they have in terms of power. They're going to vote for us anyway because it's us versus some other entity who they like even less. Right, so we can take them for granted. And the one thing you have to understand about being taken for granted is it means that the person really doesn't care about you anymore. That's what it means to be taken for granted. That I'm just going to assume you're going to follow. I'm assuming you're going to stay in place. I'm assuming that if you're abused and if you're neglected, that you're not going to do anything about it. Like, this is the nature of it, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Muriel. I saw your hand up.
I was going to just go back to it. Representative Jelani, right?
No, just Jelani. I'm not elected yet.
Oh, no,
he's not there yet.
I hope you are, man, because then that'll be a good thing. But he said something before, and I'm just going to be straightforward with it. Again, I was born. Let me just say, I was born and raised in the Bronx, and the only time I got interaction with white people was when I went to school in Queens. I went to high school in aviation. That's when my first impact. And then I went to Syracuse and in Hofstra, and very white institutions. And I've been adjuncting there for about 8 years now. And I got a special insight into the Jewish community. And this I found interesting. Amongst the Hasidic communities, I don't follow a lot of, with Brooklyn, but for example, this happened under I don't know if it was under Bloomberg. I don't know if you guys remember, but the Hasidic community was under fire because there's a practice that they do during birth, during circumcision, right, where they actually use their mouth, the rabbis, to remove the foreskin, and a lot of the babies were getting venereal diseases. And I remember this was a big deal, and it hit the papers, and I believe Bloomberg was like, we got to stop this. He tried to stop it, and he couldn't. And the reason he couldn't is exactly for what he just said, because the Hasidic community, both here in the United States and in Israel, They're a voting bloc. They're one strong voting bloc. And they do it over there and they do it over here. In fact, what I found this through their community, again, the research that I've gotten, in Israel, everyone has to join the military. That's how the state of Israel takes care of you, whatever. They take care of the state of Israel. The Hasidics are exempt from it, and yet they get the most social services in Israel. So there's that big rift between them because they're so powerfully as a power block. And I think that's the issue we're having. And I agree with him. Voting does matter. And if we don't get these kids to go out there and vote, they'll be neglected. And that's what's happening at the current moment, I think, at least.
I think
Ms. Williams?
Yeah, no, this conversation is really great. I think this is where it's getting really the pinnacle, the climax, I guess, because you threw some stuff out at us that is it's going away from just like reforming to revolutionary, dare I say, abolition. And that's where, that's really the direction we need to be. I hear people power, I hear abolition, I hear all those keywords, key phrases, and it's true that we repeated some of these things so many times, and it's like, so what's going to change? How does that narrative change? And I think, again, it's a matter of people, the everyday person, just becoming revolutionized, radicalized about these issues, because we're going around a cycle every few years. They put on a circus show, we watch and we are entertained, and meanwhile things are going on in our backyards and we can't see it because we're watching the circus show. And then there's one moment where we wake up, we see the light, and we do something about it, and then we go back to the circus show, and it's just a cycle, right? And I think part of it too, why we don't always see, I guess some of it is history repeating itself, is because the system has us really conditioned, and it's not easy to undo that conditioning that we've been comfortable and, as was said, complacent with. Right? We had a Barack Obama, and then we got a backlash, and then we had a Trump, and then we now have Biden, which was again coming from Barack, and let's see what happens after this. So there's always that continuous fight where one minute we get back on top in some sense, and the next minute we're like trying to fight our way through. And I think that one of the things we have to just continue to be mindful of is to really expose ourselves, even ourselves and others who are not even on the level we are in terms of the fight and the struggle, expose them to the truth, to the real truth about many things. We get like, sometimes I feel like when we get somewhere or something's kind of passed, again, it's like, okay, we're good. We can relax a bit. But when you think about it, there's so much more to the system that we're living in. The fact is that so many of the people that would do great change alongside us and really make things greatly different are behind bars. They're imprisoned. I know this country doesn't like to admit they have political prisoners, but there are many of them right now, and that's a serious problem. And these are people who speak truth to power. These are people who actually have risked their lives, and we've seen that many of them have been either killed or silenced on the inside. So when you're taking away people from their communities, the very revolutionary voices from the communities, and you're locking them up, you start to see the cycle again repeating. You start to see the same narrative again repeating. And then we say, but how come? Well, that's one of the ways in which we have that how come question keep coming up, right? So I think it's ultimately for us to, yes, continue to do all that we're doing in the classroom, in the streets, up in Albany, up in DC, wherever, but also there's nothing like street organizing. And I think it was Dr. Muriel that mentioned, roots, right? That's where the transformation begins, going to the roots. Like, violence is not something that's just always, oh, this just happened randomly. Why did this happen? Violence is most times it's connected to poverty, right? So when we see these things happening, and I wish I had really done something with sociology at Baruch, but it hit me too late. You would have understand the connections and the histories behind that, and why is it that we find the violence that we see, right? I'm not saying that there are people out there who are behind bars right now that are not actually guilty of something, but the majority that's inside those prison cells, those dungeons, are actually people who just got caught up somewhere along the line, and it just kept building and building and building. It became a thing where, no parent was at the home, no really guidance at home. They go to school looking for something, and that turned into a whole other issue after school. And as was said, the monies are being cut across different agencies, and then you check it that the monies are being cut, that are needed to keep the kids doing something after that. So that's not a random thing. That's just purposeful and designed in order to create more of them on the inside. So that's where it needs to change, right? Street organizing, right? People power, right? This is not a, politicians are there where they need to be, but I'm over that. I'm really about at this point as a radical, as a revolutionary, to organize amongst each other and make that change. And if we're gonna have conflict in how we're going to do it, then we need to work that through with each other, and not just like throw the next person under the bus and make this be a competition thing, because that's what the system wants us to do. To see the common oppressor, ignore him or her, and turn on each other so we can continue to have this flow, right? And we see it in the music, and we see it in so many different areas. We see it in Hollywood, and it goes on and on and on. So it's also in those areas that we don't even think about sometimes, where we need to inject the change, knowing for sure that likely you will be silenced there, but create something there and see what happens.
Okay, and I'm going to throw up just to that. Is part of it that we misunderstand? I'm sorry, Dennis, were you going to jump in?
I mean, I was.
Oh, no, please, no, Dennis, please.
What I was going to say, like, I guess offering perspective from, like, I'm going to say new generation, but I mean a younger generation.
That's what we want, man. We need to hear you.
Is one of the things I want to take part of is like what Pablo said and what Jelani said, is like taking it and mixing it. Like one word that would be like good to put in, I guess, would be unity, in terms of like community organizing and the school. And Monique kind of touched on this when she first started talking about, like, this, we're prioritizing like schools and like regions. Like there's so much pressure, like for me as a new teacher, even as a teacher now, like, this is the first time we're going to do a regions in years. Like these kids aren't prepared. Like, it's like, there's no time for anything. Like, it's just like, we're not stressing the importance of like civics or community organization in a classroom or in a school setting. We're just prioritizing like what we think is best for the students. But it's just like, it's having these students chronically testing, we can make, I'll give you an example. Like we came back from break and they were like, we need to do the PSATs ASAP. And it was just like, boom, one day done, 4 hours, 5 hours, were all automatically like put towards PSAT. And that kind of threw my schedule off. But they won't do the same thing if we're saying like, let's bring community organizers into the building and let's, teach these kids about what it means to be community organizers. Like they're not really, kids don't, they've been in a pandemic for 2 years. A lot of these kids don't know how to do a lot of things because they've been isolated for 2 years. I have kids who've never taken a state exam, like they've never taken a Regents. We did practice Regents and it was like, oh, I got to put my student ID. Oh, let me get that. I don't know what that is. Or I've never bubbled in a sheet before. Like, I've never done this. And you're just like, oh, but you can't really like say, oh, wow, you don't know how to do this. It's like, oh, wow, you've never done this, or you've never been exposed. And it's kind of like putting in together what everybody's been saying is just like this idea of unity, bringing in community organizers into the school building to teach about it, or making time, to do that. And, some of it also has with like the structure and the root problems that are within like the education system that, we need a re-education of the masses, in the sense where it's like, that's something that 10 years from now, if you're putting in time to re-educate these students, in the sense that, we need to prioritize the community and look at how important it is to teach outside of the classroom. Like the classroom is important. I'm a teacher. The classroom is important, but I've learned a lot of things outside of the classroom that when I brought it back into the classroom to discuss it with other students, you see other perspectives. You see like the lived experience. And you get that lived experience from different members, and especially looking at the increase in immigration of different students from across the world, right? Like when their perspective gets put into the room, like I had students from West Africa in my high school, or like when I went to college, I like didn't know like much about like what was going on in Spain and like fascism, and like, oh, this is how you guys protest, or this is what you guys are protesting against. And it's just like that was never exposed. And we have to use the students' lived experience, but it's all like, practice, regions, exams, like, do what you got to do. Make sure these students pass, make sure these like get the numbers up, make sure your passing rate is good. It's like, well, what else are like, what is the end goal? The end goal is for these students to go into college. And that's what college is about. College is about like higher education is about like, going out, studying abroad, looking at the world. Like people always say, like, that's what you should do when you go to college. And, at the high school level, we're not prioritizing those things. And even using the skills that the students have, like they're tech savvy, they have one thing where like they're good on social media. Like you can start simply as like that, like use your social media to promote, use this, like, especially when you're out there in the community, knocking on doors or cleaning up neighborhoods, like the Young Lords did, things like that. Like, back then it was like, there was no technology. You have to do that. You have to put flyers out. But now there's new ways that you can infuse like what these kids are learning or the technology that is in the world and bring it all together in a unison. Like, bringing it all together in the sense where let's, build a community, where, students aren't thinking that it's us versus them. It's this idea of us versus them all the time, or like, you guys want us to do this, why are we always taking tests? Like, we have to change it in the sense of like, just as a education system as a whole.
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing.
No, go right ahead.
So we're talking about your living example, Dennis. You talk about Pablo, what he did, and then now you change. So for me, yes, we've seen the same things year after year after year, but I just heard a whole change that just happened here. Pablo said, this is what you need to do, or he didn't tell you what to do. He said, what are you going to do about it? Then you did it, and then now you're going to pay it forward with someone else. We had a program when I was working for the former council member Jamani Williams. It's called participatory budgeting, right? You got $1 million of the budget, and they were like, how are we gonna get the community members involved? I was like, I'm gonna get the youth involved, because I worked in a high school, I taught in a high school, and I was working with them as well. And they were able to take $1 million, advocate for, they had to look in their community and see what they wanted to change, and they found field lights in their school. So at Tilden campus, it's a bus stop, and it's very dark. People got robbed there, different things happened. They figured if they got the field lights, it will lighten up the streets. Plus, it will also allow them to have home football games. It will allow the school to have them there longer to do things. So they had to put out the project. They had to create the vote. But before they got to that part, they actually had to sit in meetings after meetings and work with school construction authority. They had to sit down with the principal and negotiate with the principal. You can't do summer school in this school because we want this summer, because if we can speed up the process to get these field lights done, we can have it ready for September. They were at the table, and they were able to speak to all of those agencies and all the stakeholders to make this happen. And they were able to, they probably didn't even get the full $1 million the first time, but the effort, what they did, the council member then put more funding to make sure they got the field lights. And they went to the library, and they kept on seeing the change right before their eyes. How many high school kids or even adults was able to take $1 million, budget that, and put it towards what they needed? But they didn't just got to choose. They actually had to go and convince the community to vote for that project. So having them do those hands-on projects like that, that's the difference that it makes in the community. That's how we change it. And unfortunately, we don't see it in a big number, so it's hard to measure, but we see it right here with Dennis. He's a living example. I see it with my daughter. Miss Charmaine taught my daughter, and now she's a living example. You can't tell her anything. She's in Meg Evans Prep, and she's pushing herself to the limit, and that is for the foundation. So we need to do that in a more, if we're able to do that in a way that we could really see the change in numbers, that would be resources. Why are we always focused on one agency like NYPD, when there's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, there's housing that we need, there's so many other things. We need all those agencies to work together to deal with the issues in our community. So Dennis, hats off to you, and hats off to all the educators here, because we are living examples of the dream. I am part of Black Influencers United, and leadership is Dr. Shango Blake. We passed the first Black study curriculums, not just for Black History Month, not just to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is all about hero, it's really integrated into the curriculum. It's sad to say this is the first time we have it, but we have a Black Study curriculum that was just passed. Thank you to Angie Adams. Thank you to Danique Miller. Thank you for those in City Council working with Dr. Shangle Blake. So we are making changes, small as it is, but we are making changes, but we just definitely need more resources at the table for us to really make big changes.
Okay, I just want to throw it out there that part of what I'm hearing in all of your stories and Sophia called it revolutionary, which in many ways it is that the difference where you find success is where you reverse the dialogue or the conversation about how power works, right? That quite often we think of power. We've been conditioned to think of power as being centralized at the top, and so power works downwards. So power tells you what the curriculum is. The teacher has the power, therefore the teacher comes in and has the conversation and tells you what content it is you're going to drive. That the elected official gets to identify what the issue is, and they get to decide where the resources are going to be allocated. And in every one of your stories, I could take the time and say that what happened, what the transformation was that all of a sudden you tried exercising power in the opposite direction, right? So whether it is you went out into the neighborhood and went to the block and you didn't ask, whoever the community leader was, you didn't do that. You went straight down to the bottom and said to them, what is it that you want to address? Yes, okay, now how do you address it from the bottom? And at the bottom, the power comes from collectivism, right? So it comes from, now we've got to work together, right, to actually accomplish something. And in each of your stories, whether it's Dennis's story about what happened when he walked into that room with his fellow students, and rather than the power going from top to bottom, so rather than Pablo saying, get in, sit down, here's what we're going to teach, but that's not what happened. What happened was he reversed the power relationship. So he walked in and Pablo said to him, to the students, you tell me what's wrong. Okay, great. Now you've told me what's wrong. You tell me what resources you have available to you. Okay, great. Okay, now you tell me how, you're going to utilize those resources to address your problem. Right. So we're just throwing that out there for each of you to think about as you move forward in your careers and so on. That part of what we've always done wrong is always relied on power coming from the top. Right. So Jelani said it. I remember this quick funny story. The day after Barack Obama was elected, I was walking down Nostrand Avenue, right near the college, and there were two gentlemen, and they were a couple of yards ahead of me, and having a conversation with each other, and it's very similar to what Jelani said that he heard, and one of them turned to the other and said, "Hey man, like everything's gonna be all right now. We gotta." In the White House, right? And I beat myself out, right? But that finally one of us was there, and therefore the solutions were going to come from the top and be handed down to us. And I think one of the lessons that we still have not learned, and Pablo, you hear it in your story when you talked about whether it's the Hasidic communities or other communities, right? That where power really works is not where it comes from the top down. The most powerful authoritarian in the world can be toppled if the people who he's trying to control decide that they don't want him around anymore, right? And they'll drag him out by his hair. That the power really lies, we say it all the time, power to the people, but we don't think about it, right? Now, we always say, power comes in number, but we don't really think about it. The real power is at the bottom, and the question is, how do you activate that power at the bottom to then drive the top? Right, like that really is part of the conversation, and part of the change in terms of the paradigm of how we think about what we're doing. And one of the reasons why I like the composition of this panel is that every single one of you, right, is someone who works down at the bottom, the grassroots, right? Like that's where it begins. All right, so I have my last sequence, excuse me, of questions for you. And Monique, I'm going to start with you on this one. So what is our, and I want us to think towards an agenda for change, right? So Sophia, you're right. Like I'm thinking about this in a transformative way, right? That it's not just a question of touching one thing here and throwing more pebbles at the fortress, but how do we really change the game? So if you had one item, one concern, one thing that you thought that we could address, right? In putting together a 10-year, and again, I'm going back to my 10-year time period, in putting together a 10-year agenda for change, what would be the single most important concern, social problem, or issue that you think that we in our communities should address? And again, with a goal, because we got to set a goal. We got to understand what we're addressing things for. Sometimes we only address things because they're an irritant to us at the moment. But I want us to think a little differently in responding to this question. Because I think at the end of the day, if we defined what it is that we were working towards, what each of you was committing your life and your energy and your resources towards, it's towards sustainable, I'm going to use the catchphrases, sustainable development, right? Whether we're talking about equity, we're talking about justice, all of those things are just subcategories of what we're really looking for. We're looking for sustainable development in marginalized communities. So what's the key issue, and I'm going to ask each of you to share it and tell me why. What's the key issue that we should put on an agenda, a 10-year agenda that we need to address?
There's a lot of important things, but I would just have to go back to what I've been hearing in the streets through the work I've done when I ask, what do people really need? I'm hearing a stability and security, and I'm hearing housing. So when I think about what's happening with the gun violence issues, that's housing is a gun violence issue. When I'm hearing about the lack of equity in education, everything comes back to that, because if I don't have a place to live stable, I can't afford, I'm worried about where I'm going to live day to day. I have to live on my family member's couch, or living in rooms, or wherever it is. I can't function as a human being. I can't go to work. I'm worrying about that. I am not able to function in school. So we need to be, housing is a basic human right. And unfortunately, a lot of our educators, a lot of our students, a lot of our city workers, they're homeless. And that may not be I'll say for me, when I'm thinking about District 58, that's what comes up a lot. That's where a lot of our root issues are when it comes to us feeling unsettled, scared, anxiety, social, emotional, the mental health, and everything else we can talk about as well. But I would say, first, I need some place, I need shelter when I think about the hierarchy of needs.
So housing first. Okay. Anyone want to go next?
Anyway, I was on mute there. I think for me, just to touch on the housing piece, but just to go a little bit further, one thing that I've seen at least, and I want to address is Black home ownership, and not just Black home ownership, but also Black business ownership as well. I think what we've seen that would address, the affordability crisis that we have going on now. That would address the generational wealth issue that we have going on in our communities. Because once you own a home, that's wealth that you could pass down to generations and generations. And that also creates truly sustainable minority communities. And I think what we've seen right now, especially in central Brooklyn, we see the scourge of gentrification that has been going on for many years. And now people who've made, as I always say, people who've made Brooklyn what it is, or make communities what it is, aren't able to now benefit from the sidewalk cafes and stuff like that now proliferate our communities. So one thing that I want to see addressed is Black home ownership. I want to see more young Black people, older Black people being able to be able to own homes in their communities. And I think that's something that if you address that and sort of make that part of your sort of main platform, I think you address a lot of other issues. And I think that's something for me that I've seen knocking on doors and talking to people. I've seen here, I live in Crown Heights, and the block that I live on, Cal, between Schenectady and Utica, 10, 15 years ago, I'll say 70% of the homes were owned by African Americans. It was a predominantly African American block, and now you're down to 5 families, which is probably less than 10% of the homes on that block. So I think when you look at when you want to address all these issues of crime and all these other issues of inadequacies in healthcare, you got to look at Black home ownership and also then creating long-term Black sustainability.
All right. Anybody else want to take a shot at it? Single most important issue we need to address in the next 10 years to see sustainable change?
You asking me? Oh, okay.
Yeah, every member.
I agree with both of them so far. And in fact, BlackRock is going to make that really hard to do since they're buying up everything now and renting. You know, they're destroying home ownership, especially minority home ownership. But I'm going to say both of those issues is tough because I agree with them. The home ownership issue is a major issue. That is the wealth driver. How you pass on wealth, affordable housing. I think that's going to be our biggest fight. I think citywide. But I think I'm going to go with. And I know this sounds like a fluff issue, but it almost isn't. In 2013, there was a New York Times article that talked about the poverty of words, and they found that children in professional families and children from poor welfare families, there's a huge discrepancy in literacy rates and word recognition. In fact, they actually have an actual number. It's 32 million word gap at 4 years old between the children of professionals and the children of the poor. And this was a 30-year longitudinal study that they did. And I have to go with that. I think definitely you can't learn how to read if you don't have a place to live. That is what it is. But we need to do something to bring education as early as possible to the youngest as possible. And even if possible, make them activists as well very early. It could be environmental activism. It doesn't have to necessarily be, something like with race and class. It could be environmental, and even with environmental, it still falls into race and class because the people who live in the worst areas, in the most polluted areas, in the areas that are considered food deserts, are mostly poor and Black and brown. So I would say it's literacy.
Okay.
I think in part because this is near and dear to me, and it's always hard to choose what the key thing could be. But I continue to go back to the situation of the crisis of mass incarceration, and that continues to be something that is an issue in our communities, in our society. So that for me makes sense to be the key piece, because even with the other issues that were just mentioned as like home ownership and the other two great points, when those areas are lacking, we find that it leads to another solution, or what the system deems as another solution, right? So there's always that answer, like, okay, well, if they can't do this, they can't do that, they can't go here, then this is the place for them, right? And when I think about it, we have brought up education so many times, and it's so important, and how this panel is centered around that. But it just hit me like there's also the school to prison pipeline, right? So when we think about that, we're on one side coming together to do something with education and feeding our students. I mean, we've heard tonight of how Dr. Muriel's influence on Dennis has made a huge impact on him. But in the same breath, we're it's that versus the school to prison pipeline. It's that versus that they start probably way earlier than us. They're starting from, you know, from the kids are just thinking of going to like in pre-K, right? And then you guys mentioned the testing, the rigorous testing, and how it's stressful for teachers and everyone else, and it's not spending time with like nurturing the students. That to me all goes back to the fact of where they're trying to have our children go. So that has to be the main issue, in my opinion. That's just me. But also, what are the solutions, right? Instead of just locking on people, what are the solutions? Because it's true that many people need some guidance, need some help. Okay, so what do we create for them, right? Because what does it do to throw someone inside there and punish them? We shouldn't be a society that punishes, right? We should be a society that in injects restorative justice, right? And stuff like that. But we don't know anything. Well, I shouldn't say we don't know anything, but we're not forced to think through that direction. We're forced to think through the court systems, and that's the only way out. And it's punishment, punishment, punishment. So yeah, that's what I am thinking of as of the moment.
Okay. Dennis?
One that I want to say, I mean, I agree with everybody on the panel what they said, but one that I've learned more recently, especially for people in our communities, especially communities of color, is healthcare, and how important healthcare is, not just in the sense of like affordable healthcare, as you said that, but like looking at like the social and emotional learning that students go through, especially after a pandemic, but even looking at like just the regular traumas that students in our community go to every day, like losing loved ones, or, this idea of neglectful parents, or like parents aren't around, or, being raised alone, or being raised by the grandparents, like healthcare in that sense, not just the one idea of getting affordable healthcare, but helping, you know, all members of the community, not just members, not just the youth, but all members need to, have this idea of healthcare addressed. And we need to offer a hand, and offer a specialist to really look at them, look at the community, and like, they're going through this, or they've gone through this, or sometimes there's people who've gone through things that even the younger generations relate to, and like having those people being able to relate to us, the youth, and just going back and forth, especially therapists, or even looking at like how many people of color are like therapists or in psychology, and I've never in my life I've never seen like a person of color as a school counselor, a school social worker. I've never experienced that, at least for when I've been. You guys may have different points of views, but I've never experienced that. So all the social workers, the counselors, they didn't look like me. They didn't resemble me. They didn't make me want to come to them and speak to them about my problems. I wanted to speak with the problem who resemble me. And it's not just like, oh, we should go through these, but we should go to people that look like us, but it's just sometimes more comfortable in a sense. And we really have to stress the importance of healthcare all around, and how we can better our community by looking at the social emotional, looking at how to educate people, not just on that, it's just like the lack of sex education, any type of education when it's around like healthcare, like not a lot of people know. I've never really noticed it. Like I have noticed it, but like I've never seen it at this scale until I became a teacher and worked with students so often. And they're going through things in their life, and they're like, yeah, I don't have anybody to talk to, or I've gone through this. I had one student. He lost his mom during the pandemic. Dad just became a parent. He has there's four siblings altogether, and we're calling the home, and the dad just lost his wife. And, like you have teachers who don't necessarily look like the student, overcome certain obstacles in their life. It starts with affordable health care, and then it moves forward on to, having people who look like us, who can help the community, or just people who care. It's not even just about people who are color. It's people who care about helping the community, come to the community and offer those support services, saying it's okay to have gone through this. Now let's work to heal, let's work to move better. So this way that it can, reciprocate and go on to their kids and their kids. And, we've all been saying, is just helping the community as a whole, bringing unity, because people of color don't tend to always be united. And if we do it like that, it'll work best. I'm just, that's where I'm going with it.
All right. This is pretty much going to bring us to the end of our panel discussion. Thank you for joining us for this year's Shirley Chisholm Conference and Awards Ceremony. I want to take this opportunity to extend special thanks and recognition to those who helped to make this year's production a success. First, I want to give special recognition to Dr. Michael Flanagan, former director at the Caribbean Research Center and current director of development for the Medgar Evers College, for his work in helping to coordinate this year's activities. I would also like to acknowledge advisory board members Sylvester Gonzalez and Mr. Ray Allen for their support. To the Aliogana singers across the pond in England, who went through great strains and under tight deadlines to produce the special rendition of Rivers of Babylon, especially for this occasion. Special thanks to my readers, and in particular to my youth readers, Kenya Irish Bramble, Shakima Scott, Quinn Stewart, Laquan Benson, Victoria Hogan, Kenisa Irish Bramble, Sky Duvall, Ashley Hamilton, Anaya Coriet, Kimberly Cox, Ashley Gonzalez, Ariadne Irish Bramble, and of course our production assistant, Ms. Sasha Richardson. Of course, to our performers, to my brother, my friend, my colleague, Mr. Rodney Siao of the Rodney Siao Quartet for that exceptional performance of the national anthem, to Miss Gail Blanche Gill and Miss Mariel Hawes for coordinating a performance virtually across state lines. No easy task, I assure you. Your efforts are greatly appreciated. Special thanks to my virtual producer, Mr. Robert Allen of WPN Incorporated. We hope that you'll join us next year during Caribbean American Heritage Month for the 11th annual Shirley Chisholm Conference and Awards Ceremony, which I promise you will be bigger and better. Don't miss it. We invite you to come back and visit our new YouTube channel. Subscribe and follow. We will be rolling out new content regularly. Once again, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed tonight's programming. Stay well.
Require from us a song.